The trauma bay doors at Mercy Ridge Medical Center in Phoenix exploded open at 11:47 p.m. Blood sprayed across white tile as paramedics slammed a gurney through, wheels shrieking. The wounded soldier on the stretcher was barely conscious, his uniform shredded, chest carved open by shrapnel that glinted under harsh fluorescent lights. "Military personnel only," he gasped, grabbing a paramedic's sleeve with a blood-slicked hand. "Don't let civilians touch me." Dr. Marcus Brennan, chief of trauma surgery, laughed, as he snapped on latex gloves. "Relax, hero. You're in a real hospital now, not some tent in the desert." Nobody noticed the small woman standing near the supply cabinet. Nora Hayes looked like she'd blow away in a strong wind, pale, quiet, drowning in scrubs 2 sizes too big. Most staff forgot her name within a week of meeting her. Then she stepped forward. "If you move him to the table," Nora said, her voice barely above a whisper, "the shrapnel will sever his aorta. He'll bleed out in 90 seconds. The room went dead silent. The soldier turned his head. His eyes, clouded with pain and shock, suddenly went wide. His trembling arm lifted, impossible, considering his injuries, and locked into a perfect salute. "Lieutenant Hayes?" His voice cracked. They said you were dead. Kabul. The explosion. They said nobody survived. If you want to see how this story ends, stay with me until the final word. Drop a like and comment which city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. The fluorescent lights in Mercy Ridge Medical Center's trauma bay hummed with the kind of electrical buzz that gets inside your skull and stays there. Nora Hayes had stopped hearing it years ago. She'd stopped hearing a lot of things. She stood near the supply cart, hands folded, shoulders curved inward like she was trying to take up less space in the world. Her scrubs, navy blue, creased from the hospital laundry's industrial press, hung loose on a frame that hadn't carried much weight since she'd returned from overseas. Her dark hair was pulled back in a bun so tight it looked painful. Nobody looked at her. They never did. Dr. Marcus Brennan held court in the center of the bay, surrounded by residents who laughed at his jokes before he'd even delivered the punchlines. He was tall, silver-haired, the kind of man who'd probably been handsome once before arrogance had settled into every line of his face. He wore his authority like cologne. Too much. Impossible to ignore. "The problem with military medicine," Brennan was saying to a young resident named Dr. Patel, "is that it's all adrenaline and no precision. Slap a tourniquet on anything that bleeds, throw morphine at anything that screams. They call that heroism. I call it barely controlled panic." Patel laughed dutifully. Nora said nothing. She'd learned that silence was armor. The less she spoke, the less they noticed her. The less they noticed her, the fewer questions they asked. And questions led to memories, and memories led to places she couldn't afford to go. The radio on the wall crackled to life. "Incoming trauma. ETA 3 minutes. GSW to the chest. Military personnel. Critical condition." Brennan sighed like someone had interrupted his dinner. "Military? Wonderful. Prep OR2. And someone make sure we have enough O negative on hand. These guys always come in half empty." Nora moved automatically, her hands already pulling supplies from the cart. Trauma shears, IV catheters, pressure bandages. Her movements were economical, practiced, the kind of efficiency that comes from doing the same task 1,000 times in worse conditions. Nobody watched her work. Nobody ever did. The ambulance bay doors crashed open. The sound hit the trauma bay like a shockwave, metal on metal, shouting voices, the squeal of gurney wheels on polished floor. Then the smell arrived. Blood, sweat, gunpowder, and something else. Something that made Nora's hands freeze on the supply cart for just a fraction of a second. Cordite. Dust. The specific metallic tang of a battlefield. 2 paramedics pushed the gurney through the doors so fast they nearly lost control. The man strapped to it was maybe 25, maybe younger. It was hard to tell under the blood. His uniform was Marine Corps, torn to ribbons. His chest was a mess of shrapnel wounds, some still bleeding, some clotted with field dressings that hadn't been applied by civilian hands. Staff Sergeant Ryan Cole, multiple penetrating trauma to the thorax, the lead paramedic rattled off. BP crashing, oxygen sat at 86. He's been asking for military medical personnel only. Of course he has. Brennan stepped forward, already reaching for the gurney. They always do. Let's get him on the table. No. The word came out of Cole's mouth like gravel, wet and desperate. His hand shot out, grabbed the gurney rail with knuckles gone white. No civilians. Get me someone who knows combat trauma. Brennan's expression hardened. Son, I've been doing this for 23 years. You're in shock. Let us help you. Not you. Cole's eyes were wild now, darting around the room. Someone who's been there. Someone who understands. Understands what? That you're bleeding out? Brennan grabbed the gurney and started pulling it toward the operating bay. Trauma is trauma. Now let's... If you move him, Nora said quietly, he'll die. The words cut through the chaos like a scalpel through skin. Every head in the room turned. Brennan stared at her like she'd started speaking in tongues. Excuse me? Nora stepped forward. Her voice was still soft, but something in it had changed. Something that made the air in the room feel different. The shrapnel. Look at the entry wounds. 3 pieces. Triangular pattern, high-velocity impact. One of them is sitting on his descending aorta. If you move him to the table without stabilization, you'll shift the fragment. He'll hemorrhage faster than you can clamp. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then Brennan laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. That's adorable. Nurse Hayes, was it? I appreciate the enthusiasm, but this is a trauma bay, not a classroom. Why don't you go check on the inventory and let the actual doctors handle... Cole's hand shot out again. This time it wasn't grabbing the gurney. It was forming a salute. His arm shook violently, muscles screaming from the effort, blood running down his forearm and dripping onto the white sheets. But the salute was perfect. Textbook. The kind of thing that gets drilled into you until it's muscle memory deeper than breathing. Lieutenant Hayes, he whispered. His voice broke on her name. They told us, Kabul, the IED, they said you didn't make it out. The trauma bay went silent except for the steady beep of monitors. Nora looked at him, really looked at him, and something flickered across her face. Recognition, memory, pain. Then it was gone, buried under the same careful blankness she always wore. At ease, Sergeant, she said quietly, and drop the salute before you tear your sutures. Brennan's face had gone from confused to irritated to something approaching shock. What the hell is going on here? But Nora wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at Cole, her eyes scanning his injuries with the kind of focus that made everything else in the room disappear. Her hands moved to his neck, checking his pulse, then to his chest, fingers gentle but certain as they traced the pattern of wounds. 3 fragments, she said, more to herself than anyone else. High-velocity shrapnel, probably from an IED. The big one is lodged against the aorta. You can see the pulsing if you look at the wound edge. The second one clipped his lung but missed the pulmonary artery. The third is superficial, left pectoral, no major damage. She straightened up, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed completely. The softness was gone. In its place was something cold and precise and absolutely certain. We need to stabilize him here before any movement. Start a second IV line, push fluids to maintain pressure. Get me an ultrasound so we can map the fragment locations. And prep OR2 with a thoracic tray, full vascular setup, not the standard trauma kit. Dr. Patel blinked. But we don't... Now, doctor. Patel moved. So did 2 of the nurses. They moved automatically without thinking, responding to the command in her voice like they'd been trained to. Brennan's face had turned an impressive shade of red. Nurse Hayes, I don't know what kind of military fantasy you're playing out here, but you do not give orders in my trauma bay. This man needs surgery, and he needs it now. I'm moving him to... Touch that gurney, Nora said, her eyes locked on Brennan's, and you'll kill him. Is that what you want on your record, doctor? Another trauma death because you were too arrogant to listen? The words hung in the air like smoke. Brennan's mouth opened, closed, opened again. How dare you? The ambulance bay doors slammed open again. This time it wasn't paramedics. 4 men in military police uniforms strode through the entrance, boots echoing on tile. Behind them came 2 more figures in dress uniforms, ribbons and insignia gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The lead MP, a woman with sergeant stripes and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite, scanned the room once before her eyes locked on Nora. She snapped to attention. So did every MP behind her. Lieutenant Hayes, the sergeant said crisply. We received word that Staff Sergeant Cole requested military medical personnel. We've contacted Fort Huachuca. Colonel Vance is en route. Nora's jaw tightened. That won't be necessary, Sergeant. I can handle... With respect, ma'am, the colonel was very clear. When we told him you were here, he said he was coming personally. The sergeant's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes softened just slightly. He also said to tell you that you don't get to hide anymore. The trauma bay had gone completely silent. Dr. Patel stood frozen with an IV bag in his hands. The nurses had stopped moving. Brennan looked like someone had just explained that gravity was optional. Lieutenant, he said slowly. You were Lieutenant Nora Hayes, U.S. Army Medical Corps, the MP sergeant said flatly. 3 tours, Afghanistan and Iraq. Decorated combat medic. Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart. She paused. Officially listed as KIA in Kabul, August 2019. Unofficially redesignated as medical discharge following classified incident. Cole made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She saved 14 of us that night. The convoy hit an IED field. Our medic was gone in the first blast. Lieutenant Hayes, he coughed, blood flecking his lips. She worked on us for 6 hours straight while they were still shelling our position, kept us alive until evac arrived. Then the building we were sheltering in took a direct hit, and we thought... His voice broke. We thought she was gone. Nora's hands were steady as she adjusted the IV line, but her face had gone very pale. That was a long time ago, Sergeant. Different life. Same person, though. Cole's eyes were starting to glaze, shock settling in deeper. Still the best combat medic I ever saw. Still the one who taught me that staying calm keeps people breathing. His words slurred, his head rolled to the side. He's crashing, one of the nurses shouted. The monitor screamed. Cole's blood pressure was dropping fast. 90 over 60, then 85, then 80. His oxygen saturation plummeted. Brennan lunged for the gurney. OR2 now, we don't have time for... Nora's hand shot out and caught his wrist. Her grip was small but absolute. I said no. He's dying. He's going into hypovolemic shock from blood loss, and moving him will accelerate the hemorrhage. Nora's voice was ice cold, clinical, the voice of someone who'd made these calls in worse situations. We stabilize him here. You want to save him? Then stop thinking like a civilian surgeon and start thinking like someone who's worked in a combat zone. She released Brennan's wrist and turned to the nurses. Pressure bandage on the primary wound. Don't try to remove anything, just contain the bleeding. Start pressors to keep his BP above 80, and someone get me that ultrasound. They scrambled to obey. Brennan stood there, face red, hands shaking with rage or shock or both. This is my hospital, my trauma bay. You're a nurse. You don't get to... I'm a nurse now, Nora said quietly, her hands already working on Cole's chest, applying pressure with the kind of precision that comes from doing it in the dark, under fire, with mortars falling close enough to feel the shockwave. But I was a combat medic for 8 years before that. I've done more emergency trauma surgery in field conditions than most civilian doctors do in their entire careers. So right now, Dr. Brennan, you have 2 choices. You can work with me and save this man's life. Or you can fight me on this and explain to the review board why a decorated Marine died because you were more concerned with your ego than his survival. The ultrasound machine arrived, wheeled in by Dr. Patel, who looked like he'd just watched his entire understanding of hospital hierarchy collapse. Nora took the probe without looking away from Cole. Her hands moved with absolute certainty, one maintaining pressure on the wound, the other guiding the ultrasound across his chest. The screen flickered to life, showing the gray and black chaos of damaged tissue, pooled blood, and there, got it. Her voice was flat, factual. Shrapnel fragment, approximately 4 centimeters, sitting against the aortic wall. See that pulsing? Every heartbeat is pushing it deeper. If we'd moved him... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Brennan stared at the screen. His face had gone from red to white. Jesus Christ, he whispered. Not quite, Nora said. Just someone who's seen this before. She turned to the nurses. We're taking him to OR2, but we do it my way. Minimal movement. Keep constant pressure on that wound. Dr. Patel, you're going to maintain the IV lines during transport. Dr. Brennan, she looked at him, and for the first time since Cole had been wheeled in, her expression softened just slightly. You're the best thoracic surgeon in this hospital. I've read your papers. But this isn't a standard procedure. If you want to scrub in, I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing. Brennan opened his mouth, closed it. For a long moment, he just stared at her. This small, quiet woman he'd walked past 100 times without seeing. Who the hell are you? He asked finally. The ambulance bay doors opened again before Nora could answer. This time, the man who walked through wasn't wearing scrubs or a uniform. He wore army dress blues, ribbons covering his chest, a colonel's eagle gleaming on his shoulder. He was maybe 50, built like someone who'd spent a lifetime staying in fighting shape, with a face that had seen things and decided to keep going anyway. He stopped just inside the entrance. His eyes found Nora. And then Colonel David Vance, commander of Fort Huachuca Medical Command, came to attention and saluted. Lieutenant Hayes, he said, his voice carrying across the silent trauma bay. Permission to approach. Nora's hands didn't stop working on Cole's wounds. At ease, Colonel. And I'm not a lieutenant anymore. Haven't been for 5 years. Once a soldier, always a soldier. Vance crossed the space between them in long strides. He looked down at Cole, then at the monitors, then at the ultrasound screen. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went hard. Same situation as Kabul. Similar, IED shrapnel, close-range detonation. He's lucky the fragments didn't tumble. He's lucky you're here. Vance turned to face the room, and when he spoke again, his voice had the kind of authority that made even Brennan stand up straighter. For those of you who don't know, Lieutenant Nora Hayes served 3 combat tours as an Army medic. She has more field trauma experience than most civilian surgeons will ever see. She saved more lives under fire than I can count. And if she says something about combat trauma, you listen. Clear? Nobody argued. Vance looked back at Nora. What do you need? OR2 prepped for thoracic trauma. Full vascular kit. I need someone who knows their way around an aortic repair, and I need them to understand that this isn't going to be textbook. Dr. Brennan is... Vance started. Here, Brennan said quietly. He'd been staring at Nora like he was seeing her for the first time. I'm here, and I'm listening. Nora nodded once. Then let's move. Carefully. They transferred Cole to the operating room with the kind of precision you'd use to defuse a bomb. 6 people, moving in perfect synchronization, maintaining constant pressure on his wounds while the gurney glided down the corridor. Nora walked beside him the entire time, one hand on his shoulder, her voice low and steady. Stay with me, Sergeant. You didn't survive Kandahar just to check out in Phoenix. Keep breathing. That's all you have to do right now. Just keep breathing. Cole's eyes fluttered open. The others, from that night, they made it home. Every single one of them. Because you kept them calm while I worked. You did good, Cole. Now let me return the favor. The OR doors swung closed behind them. In the trauma bay, the MP sergeant turned to the remaining staff. Nobody talks about this. Not to the press, not to social media, not to anyone outside this hospital. Lieutenant Hayes' service record is partially classified for a reason. We clear? Dr. Patel nodded slowly. What happened to her? In Kabul, I mean. If she was listed as KIA Basi Ipaikis, the sergeant's expression went carefully blank. That's not my story to tell, Doctor. But I will say this. Lieutenant Hayes died in Kabul in every way that matters. The person who came back wasn't the same, and she had her reasons for wanting to stay invisible. She paused. Those reasons just stopped mattering. Through the OR windows, they could see Nora scrubbing in. Her movements were methodical, thorough, the same careful precision she brought to everything. But her eyes were different now, sharper, harder. Like someone had flipped a switch she'd spent years keeping off. The surgery took 4 hours. Word spread through the hospital like wildfire. The quiet nurse nobody noticed was a war hero, a decorated combat medic, someone who'd been listed as killed in action and had somehow ended up working the night shift in a Phoenix emergency room, invisible and forgotten. By the time Nora emerged from the OR, still in her surgical gown, blood on her sleeves, there was a crowd waiting. Hospital staff, the MPs, Colonel Vance, and at the back of the group, trying to look smaller than he was, Dr. Marcus Brennan. Nora pulled down her surgical mask. Her face was pale, exhausted, but her eyes were clear. He's stable. The shrapnel is out. We repaired the aortic damage and sealed the lung perforation. If he makes it through the next 24 hours without complications, he'll recover fully. The crowd erupted in applause. Nora flinched at the sound like it was gunfire. Colonel Vance stepped forward. That was exceptional work, Lieutenant. The kind of surgery that saves careers and lives. You should... I need some air, Nora said abruptly. She was already moving, pushing through the crowd, heading for the exit. Vance didn't try to stop her, but Brennan did. Nurse Hayes, he called after her. Wait! She stopped but didn't turn around. Brennan caught up to her in the hallway, away from the crowd. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Brennan cleared his throat. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. Several, actually. For tonight. For every time I dismissed you or talked over you or acted like you were invisible, I was wrong. Completely, arrogantly wrong. Nora still didn't turn around. You were doing your job the way you were trained to do it. Can't fault someone for that. Yes, you can. Especially when that someone should have known better. Brennan moved so he was facing her. I read your file. Colonel Vance showed me. Silver Star for pulling 8 wounded soldiers out of a burning building while under direct fire. Bronze Star for performing emergency surgery on a collapsed soldier while insurgents were literally shooting through the walls. Purple Heart for... His voice cracked slightly. For the injuries you sustained when that building collapsed on top of you. Nora's jaw tightened. That was a different life. Was it? Because from where I'm standing, the person who saved Cole tonight is the same person who saved those soldiers in Kabul. He struggled for words. You just got very good at pretending to be someone else. I got good at surviving, Nora said flatly. There's a difference. Why here? Why Phoenix? Why work as a night shift nurse when you could have... Brennan gestured helplessly. Why hide? For the first time since walking out of the OR, Nora turned to look at him directly. Her eyes were very tired. Because I was tired of people dying, she said simply. In combat, you make impossible choices. You decide who gets treatment first when you don't have enough supplies for everyone. You watch good people bleed out because the morphine ran out 2 patients ago. You learn to live with the fact that doing your best sometimes still means losing someone. She paused. I didn't want to make those choices anymore. I wanted to work somewhere quiet, somewhere normal, somewhere I could just be a nurse and save lives without the weight of a war on my shoulders. Mirs, and instead you ended up here, working under a surgeon who treated you like furniture. Better than being treated like a hero. Nora's voice was bitter. You know what happens when people find out about your service record? They start asking questions. They want war stories. They want to know what it was like, what you saw, how many people you saved. They turn your trauma into entertainment. I didn't want that. I just wanted to be left alone. Brennan was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you want now? Nora looked back toward the OR, where Cole was fighting for his life. I want him to live. Everything else, I'll figure out tomorrow. She walked away before Brennan could respond. But as she disappeared around the corner, heading for the staff exit and the cool desert night beyond, she didn't see the crowd that had gathered in the hallway behind her. Didn't see the nurses watching her with something like awe in their eyes. Didn't see Colonel Vance standing with his arms crossed, a small smile on his face. And she didn't see Dr. Marcus Brennan standing alone in the corridor, staring after her with the expression of a man who'd just realized he'd been wrong about everything that mattered. Outside, in the parking lot behind Mercy Ridge Medical Center, Nora leaned against the brick wall and let herself shake. It had been 5 years since she'd done combat medicine. 5 years since she'd made those kinds of calls under pressure. 5 years since anyone had called her lieutenant. She'd thought that part of her was dead, buried under the rubble in Kabul, along with the 12 soldiers she couldn't save. But tonight, when Cole had looked at her with dying eyes and called her by her rank, something had cracked open inside her chest, something she'd spent years trying to seal shut. The trauma bay doors opened. The MP sergeant stepped out, lit a cigarette, and leaned against the wall beside her. Thought you'd quit, Nora said quietly. I did. 3 times. The sergeant took a long drag. Then I heard you were alive, and I figured one cigarette wouldn't kill me. Sergeant Martinez, Nora said. I heard you made it out of that mess. Barely. You carried me 200 yards with a dislocated shoulder and a piece of rebar through your leg. I remember thinking, this crazy bitch is going to get us both killed. Martinez smiled without humor. Then we made it to the evac point, and I passed out, and when I woke up 3 days later, they told me you were dead. They said the building collapsed. They said there was no way anyone survived. There wasn't, Nora said softly. Not really. Martinez looked at her. You've been here the whole time? In Phoenix? Different cities, different hospitals. I move every year or so. Stay under the radar, just exist. That's not living, Lieutenant. It's close enough. They stood in silence for a while, watching the desert stars through the light pollution. Finally, Martinez flicked her cigarette into the parking lot. Cole's family is flying in tomorrow. His wife, his 2 kids. They're going to want to meet the person who saved him. Colonel Vance is calling a press conference. The hospital is already getting calls from local news. She paused. You can't hide from this, ma'am. Not anymore. Nora closed her eyes. I know. So what are you going to do? I don't know. Martinez nodded slowly. Then she pushed off the wall, straightened her uniform, and snapped to attention one more time. For what it's worth, Lieutenant, I'm glad you're not dead. The Corps lost a lot of good people in Kabul. I'm glad you weren't one of them. She walked back inside, leaving Nora alone in the darkness. Nora stood there for a long time, feeling the cool night air on her skin, listening to the distant sound of sirens and traffic and the city breathing around her. She thought about Cole, fighting for his life in the OR upstairs. She thought about the 14 soldiers she'd saved that night in Kabul and the 12 she'd lost. She thought about all the years she'd spent trying to be invisible, trying to be normal, trying to be anyone except the person she'd been in that burning building. Then she thought about the look in Cole's eyes when he'd recognized her. The relief, the hope, the absolute certainty that he was going to be okay because she was there. She'd forgotten what that felt like. Being someone's certainty, being the reason someone kept breathing. It was terrifying. And somewhere deep inside, beneath all the scars and the silence and the careful walls she'd built, it felt like coming home. Inside the hospital, in the quiet chaos of the night shift, Dr. Marcus Brennan sat in his office staring at the military service record Colonel Vance had pulled up on his computer. Nora Hayes' face looked back at him from the photo, younger, harder, with eyes that had seen things Brennan couldn't imagine. 3 tours, 14 combat decorations, over 300 documented field trauma interventions. A record that read like fiction, like something out of a movie, except every word of it was verified, documented, real. And he treated her like she was invisible. Brennan closed the file and put his head in his hands. Tomorrow, there would be questions. There would be press conferences and inquiries and probably a very uncomfortable meeting with the hospital board. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of his office, all he could think about was the small woman in oversized scrubs, who'd stood in his trauma bay and saved a life he would have killed through arrogance and ignorance. He'd spent 23 years being the smartest person in every room. Tonight, he'd learned what it felt like to be the stupidest. His phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Patel. Cole's vitals are stable. BP normalizing. Hayes was right about everything. Brennan typed back, "Of course she was." Then he added, "Let me know if anything changes. I'll be here all night." He would be, because somewhere between the trauma bay and the OR, between the moment Nora had stopped him from killing Cole and the moment she'd walked out those doors looking like someone who'd survived a war, only to find herself in the middle of another one, something had shifted. Marcus Brennan had built his career on being right, on knowing more than everyone else, on being the person other doctors looked up to. But tonight, he'd seen what real medicine looked like, what real courage looked like, and it had come from the one person in his hospital he'd never bothered to see. The night stretched on. Cole's monitors beeped steadily in the ICU. Nora sat in her car in the parking lot, unable to make herself go home. Colonel Vance stood in the hallway making phone calls, his voice quiet but firm as he explained to various superior officers that yes, Lieutenant Hayes was alive, and no, there would not be any immediate reassignment to active duty. And yes, he understood the complications this created, but with all due respect, The woman had earned the right to make her own choices about her future. And in the trauma bay, where it had all started just hours before, the night shift continued. Patients arrived and were treated. Nurses moved through their routines. The fluorescent lights hummed. But everything had changed. Because somewhere in Phoenix, in a hospital where nobody had noticed her for 2 years, Nora Hayes had stopped being invisible. And the world was about to learn what that meant. The sun hit Phoenix at 6:47 a.m. like a hammer, turning the hospital parking lot into a griddle. Nora hadn't slept. She'd sat in her decade-old Honda Civic for 7 hours, watching the sky turn from black to gray to that particular shade of desert gold that made everything look like it was on fire. Her hands were still shaking. They hadn't stopped since she'd walked out of the OR. She made herself go back inside. The night shift was ending. Nurses clustered around the station, exhausted, drinking coffee that tasted like burned plastic. They looked up when Nora walked past. They actually looked at her. Not through her, not past her, at her. One of them, Jessica maybe, or Jennifer, Nora had never bothered learning which, opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, then closed it again when Nora kept walking. The ICU was quiet, except for the ventilators and monitors creating their mechanical symphony. Nora found Cole's room without asking anyone where it was. Through the window, she could see him hooked up to more machines than seemed necessary, his chest rising and falling in rhythm with the respirator. But his vitals were good, strong, the kind of numbers that meant he was going to make it. She didn't go in, just stood there in the hallway, watching him breathe. He asked about you. Nora turned. Dr. Patel stood behind her, still in his scrubs from the night before, dark circles under his eyes. He looked younger than he probably was, late 20s, maybe early 30s, with the kind of earnest face that made him seem like he was still in medical school. When? Nora asked. About an hour ago, when we brought him off sedation for the neuro check. First thing he said was your name. Patel moved to stand beside her, both of them watching Cole through the glass. He wanted to make sure you were still here, that you were real. I think he was afraid he'd hallucinated the whole thing. Nora said nothing. Patel cleared his throat. I looked you up. After the surgery, found some articles from military journals. There was one from 2018 about combat medicine innovations. They interviewed you about field trauma protocols. He paused. You told them that the hardest part of emergency medicine wasn't the medicine. It was learning to live with the ones you couldn't save. I was younger then, Nora said quietly. Said a lot of things I shouldn't have. Did you mean it? She looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw something in his face she recognized, the hunger to understand, the need to know if it ever got easier. Every word, she said, the ones you lose stay with you forever. You learn to carry them, but they never get lighter. Patel nodded slowly, like she'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. Dr. Brennan wants to see you. He's been in his office all night. I think... He stopped, chose his words carefully. I think last night changed something for him. Good for him. He's not a bad person, you know. He's been the best at what he does for so long that he forgot other people might know things he doesn't. Patel shifted uncomfortably. I'm not making excuses. What he said to you in the trauma bay was wrong, but I've worked with him for 3 years, and I've never seen him look the way he looked after you walked out last night. Nora turned back to the window. Cole had moved slightly, his hand twitching against the sheets. Dreaming, maybe, or remembering. Tell Dr. Brennan I'll talk to him later, she said. Right now I need to check on my patient. She pushed through the door before Patel could respond. Inside, the room smelled like disinfectant and clean bandages and the particular sterile sweetness of hospital air. Cole's eyes were closed, but his breathing had changed, shallower, faster, aware. Nora moved to his bedside, checked his chart, adjusted his IV flow by 0.5 milliliter. Her hands were steady now. They always were when she was working. You don't have to pretend to be asleep, she said quietly. Your respiratory rate gave you away 30 seconds ago. Cole's eyes opened. They were clearer than they'd been the night before. No shock, no trauma haze, just exhaustion and pain and something that might have been relief. Ma'am, he said. His voice was raw from the intubation tube, barely above a whisper. At ease, Sergeant, and it's just Nora now. Has been for a long time. Doesn't feel right calling you that. He tried to shift position, winced, stopped. They said you pulled shrapnel off my aorta. Said another 10 minutes and I would have bled out. You would have. The fragment was already cutting into the arterial wall. Nora pulled up a chair, sat down beside his bed. How much do you remember from last night? All of it. The IED, the ambulance, getting to the hospital and seeing all these civilian doctors who had no idea what they were looking at. His jaw tightened. Then I saw you. And I thought I was hallucinating. Because you were dead. They told us you were dead. I was for a while. Then I got better. Cole's laugh turned into a cough that made him grab his chest. Nora reached for the morphine drip, increased it slightly. Easy. Your lung is still healing. You tear those sutures and you'll be right back in surgery. He settled back against the pillows, breathing carefully. What happened in Kabul after the building came down? That's not a conversation for today. Today you focus on breathing and healing and not dying on me after I spent 4 hours putting you back together. Yes, ma'am. He was quiet for a moment. My wife. They said she's flying in today. With the kids. I heard. She'll be here around noon. She doesn't know about Kabul, about any of it. I never told her the details. Cole's eyes found hers. When she gets here, she's going to want to thank you. She's going to ask questions. And I don't know what to tell her about who you are. Nora stood up, smoothed the blanket across his chest with the kind of automatic care nurses develop after years of practice. Tell her I'm the nurse who happened to be working when you came in. That's all she needs to know. That's not all you are? It's all I want to be. She left before he could argue. The hallway was filling up now, day shift arriving, night shift heading home, the hospital waking up to the controlled chaos of a Friday morning. Nora made it maybe 20 feet before someone called her name. Nurse Hayes! She turned. The hospital administrator was walking toward her with the kind of purposeful stride that meant bad news wrapped in professional courtesy. Patricia Keene was 50-ish, impeccably dressed, with the sort of smile that never quite reached her eyes. Ms. Keene, Nora said carefully, I've been trying to reach you all night. You didn't answer your phone. I was in surgery, then I was sitting in my car. Neither seemed like good times to take calls. Keene's smile tightened. Yes, well, we need to talk about last night. There are complications. Staff Sergeant Cole is stable. His prognosis is good. I don't see any complications. I'm not talking about medical complications. Keene gestured toward her office. Please, this won't take long. Nora followed her down the corridor and into an office that looked like it had been decorated by someone who'd read an article about minimalist design and taken it too seriously. White walls, glass desk, uncomfortable chairs. Keene sat behind the desk and folded her hands. First, she said, let me say that what you did last night was extraordinary. You saved that young man's life. The hospital is very grateful. But, Nora said, but there are questions. Legal questions. Liability questions. Questions about protocol and chain of command, and whether a registered nurse, regardless of her military background, should have been making surgical decisions in a trauma bay. Keene's smile had vanished completely. Dr. Brennan filed an incident report at 3 a.m. Nothing malicious. He was very clear about that. But he documented everything that happened, including the fact that you overrode his medical judgment and performed procedures that were outside your scope of practice as a nurse. Nora felt something cold settle in her stomach. I saved a patient's life using skills I developed over 8 years of combat medicine. That's not outside my scope of practice. That's exactly within it. In a military context, perhaps. But this is a civilian hospital, Nurse Hayes. We have protocols. We have standards of care. We have malpractice insurance and liability concerns and regulatory boards that don't care about your service record. They care about whether you followed procedure. Keene leaned forward. And you didn't. You countermanded the chief of surgery in front of the entire trauma team. You made calls that should have gone through proper channels. And now we have to figure out how to handle this before it becomes a legal nightmare. Said, so you're firing me? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Nora stood up. It's fine. I've been fired before. I'll clean out my locker and be gone by the end of the day. Sit down, Nurse Hayes. Something in Keene's voice made Nora pause. Not quite authority. Something else. Something that sounded almost like respect. She sat. Keene pulled out a folder, opened it, and spread several documents across the desk. Medical journals, news articles, military commendation records. I spent the last 6 hours reading about you, Keene said quietly. About what you did in Kandahar and Kabul and a dozen other places whose names I can't pronounce. About the soldiers you saved and the protocols you developed and the innovations you brought to battlefield medicine that are now standard practice in combat zones worldwide. She looked up. You could have had any job you wanted. Military hospitals, VA centers, trauma research positions. Instead, you've been working night shifts in emergency rooms across the Southwest, staying under the radar, never staying anywhere longer than a year. I like to travel. You like to hide, Keene tapped one of the articles. This piece from Army Times says you turned down the Medal of Honor twice. The first time because you said there were others who deserved it more. The second time because you'd already left the service and didn't want the attention. Nora said nothing. So here's my problem, Keene continued. I have a nurse who's technically violated half a dozen hospital protocols. Who's created a potential liability issue? Who's put me in a position where I should, by every administrative guideline, be suspending her pending a full investigation? She paused. And I also have a nurse who saved a life that would have been lost if she'd followed those protocols, who saw something no one else saw, who had the courage and the skill to act when acting meant putting her career on the line. What do you want from me, Ms. Keene? I want to know if you're going to disappear the second things get uncomfortable, because that's what you do, isn't it? You find a place, you work there until something forces you into the light, and then you vanish before anyone can ask too many questions. The words hit harder than Nora expected. She looked down at her hands, small, scarred, steadier than they had any right to be. Yeah, she said finally. That's what I do. Keene nodded slowly. Then let me make this easy for you. The hospital board is meeting at noon. They're going to review the incident report. They're going to ask questions. And they're going to want answers about why a nurse was making surgical decisions without supervision. She closed the folder. If you're planning to run, now would be the time. But if you actually stay and face this, I'll go to that meeting and tell them exactly what I think, which is that you're the best emergency trauma nurse I've ever seen and that this hospital would be lucky to keep you. Nora looked at her. Why? Because I'm tired of watching talented people get crushed by bureaucracy, and because that young man upstairs is alive because you had the guts to trust your training instead of your fear. Keene's expression softened slightly. Also, my brother was a Marine, served 2 tours in Fallujah. He came home with injuries that should have killed him, but his combat medic kept him breathing long enough to get to a field hospital. He never learned her name, but I've always wondered what happened to people like her. People who save lives and then just disappear into the world like they were never there. The office went quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning. I need to think, Nora said. You have until noon. That's when the board meets. Nora stood, walked to the door, then stopped with her hand on the handle. The report Dr. Brennan filed. Was it really not malicious? Read it yourself. Keene pulled a paper from the folder and held it out. He documented everything, including the part where he admitted that his initial assessment was wrong and that your intervention saved the patient's life. He's not trying to get you fired, Nurse Hayes. If anything, he's trying to protect you by establishing a record of what actually happened before anyone else can spin it differently. Nora took the report but didn't read it. I'll let you know by noon. She walked out into a hallway that felt different than it had an hour ago. Louder. Brighter. Too many people looking at her, recognizing her, wanting to talk to her about what she'd done. She made it to the staff locker room and locked herself in a bathroom stall, sitting on the closed toilet lid with her head in her hands. The report from Brennan sat folded in her pocket. She didn't need to read it to know what it said. He'd covered his ass and hers in the same document, smart, professional, exactly what a good surgeon should do. But it didn't change the fundamental problem. She was visible now. The invisible nurse everyone had ignored was suddenly the center of attention. And attention meant questions, and questions meant memories, and memories meant... Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. Lieutenant Hayes, this is Colonel Vance. I know you're probably considering leaving. Don't. Come to the cafeteria. 3rd floor. There's someone who wants to meet you. Nora stared at the message for a long time. Then she stood up, splashed water on her face, and went to find out what fresh hell the universe had prepared for her. The cafeteria was mostly empty. Too late for breakfast, too early for lunch. Colonel Vance sat at a corner table with two other people. One was Sergeant Martinez from the night before, looking tired but alert in fresh fatigues. The other was a woman Nora had never seen, mid-30s, dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, wearing an army officer's uniform with captain's bars on her shoulders. Nora approached slowly. Vance stood, gestured to an empty chair. "Lieutenant Hayes, this is Captain Rachel Ortiz. She's with Army Medical Command, currently stationed at Walter Reed. She flew in this morning specifically to talk to you." Ortiz extended her hand. Her grip was firm, professional. "It's an honor, Lieutenant. I've read your work on field trauma protocols. Your paper on damage control resuscitation changed how we train combat medics." "I'm not a lieutenant anymore," Nora said quietly. She sat down anyway. "You'll always be a lieutenant to the people whose lives you saved." Ortiz pulled out a tablet, called up a file. "I'm going to be direct because I know you don't have patience for bureaucratic dancing. The Army wants you back. Not on active duty. We understand you medically discharged for legitimate reasons. But as a civilian consultant, training position, you'd work with combat medics at bases across the country, teaching them what you learned in the field. Good pay, full benefits, complete control over your schedule." "No," Nora said. "You haven't heard the full offer yet." "Don't need to. I'm done with the military." Ortiz didn't look surprised. "Can I ask why?" "Because I spent 8 years watching people die in places they shouldn't have been, for reasons I still don't understand, and I'm tired." Nora's voice was flat, emotionless. "I'm tired of war. I'm tired of trauma. I'm tired of being the person everyone expects to have answers when sometimes there aren't any answers. So no, Captain Ortiz, I'm not coming back. Not as a consultant, not as a trainer, not in any capacity." Vance leaned forward. "What if it's not about you?" "Excuse me? What if it's not about what you want or what you're tired of? What if it's about the 22-year-old medic who's going to be in a firefight next month with no idea how to handle multiple casualties and limited supplies? What if it's about giving that kid the training that might keep him alive and help him save his squad?" Vance's expression was hard. "You don't get to just walk away, Hayes. Not when you know things other people need to learn. Watch me." Martinez spoke for the first time. "The building in Kabul. You remember what you said to me while you were carrying me out?" Nora's jaw tightened. "I said a lot of things. You said, 'Nobody gets left behind, not today, not ever.' You said it over and over, like a promise." Martinez leaned across the table. "But you left yourself behind, didn't you? You got everyone else out and then you just vanished, became someone else. Left the real Nora Hayes buried in the rubble. That's not, isn't it?" Martinez's voice was gentle but unyielding. "You've been hiding for 5 years, moving from city to city, hospital to hospital, making sure nobody ever sees who you really are. But last night you couldn't hide anymore because someone needed you to be Lieutenant Hayes, not Nurse Hayes. And you saved him, just like you saved all of us." Nora stood abruptly. "I need to go." "The board meeting is in 40 minutes, Vance said. "You going to be there?" "I don't know." She walked away before any of them could stop her, out of the cafeteria and down the stairs and through corridors that suddenly felt like they were closing in. Her phone kept buzzing, texts, calls, notifications she didn't bother checking. The whole world wanted a piece of her now. The invisible nurse had become visible, and visibility was a cage. She found herself in the hospital chapel without meaning to. It was empty, quiet, just rows of chairs facing a simple altar. Nora had never been religious, had stopped believing in any kind of higher power the first time she'd watched a 19-year-old bleed out in her arms, crying for his mother. But she sat down anyway, in the back row, and let herself feel everything she'd been holding at bay since Cole had recognized her. Terror, exhaustion, anger, grief for all the years she'd lost trying to be someone she wasn't, and underneath it all, something else, something that felt dangerously close to hope. The door opened, footsteps on tile. Someone sat down beside her. "I used to come here between shifts," Dr. Brennan said quietly, "when I'd lost a patient, or made a mistake, or just needed to remember why I started doing this in the first place." Nora didn't look at him. "You here to apologize again?" "No. I'm here to tell you that you were right and I was wrong, and that if you walk away from this hospital because of me, I'll spend the rest of my career regretting it. Dramatic. True. Brennan was quiet for a moment. I filed that incident report to protect you, but I also filed it because I needed to document what actually happened before hospital politics could turn it into something else. There are people on the board who won't like the fact that a nurse overrode the chief of surgery. They're going to push for disciplinary action, maybe termination. So I'm getting fired. Not if I have anything to say about it, and not if you show up to that meeting and tell them exactly what you told me last night, that you saw something I missed because you have experience I don't, and that following protocol would have killed that patient. He turned to look at her. But you have to be there. You have to be willing to stand up and defend what you did. I'm not good at standing up in front of people. You stood up in front of insurgents shooting at you. I think you can handle a hospital board. Nora finally looked at him. He looked older in the chapel's dim light, tired, like the weight of his own arrogance had finally caught up with him. Why do you care? She asked. I made you look like a fool in front of your entire team. I undermined your authority. I did everything you spend your career teaching residents not to do. Because you were right, Brennan said simply. And because for 23 years I've been so convinced that I was the smartest person in every room that I stopped listening to anyone else. My residents are terrified of contradicting me. My nurses have learned to just nod and follow orders. And last night, a woman who'd been invisible to me for 2 years saved a life I would have lost because I was too arrogant to see what was right in front of me. He paused. So yeah, I care. Because you reminded me what medicine is supposed to be. Not ego, not hierarchy, just people with different skills working together to save lives. The chapel went quiet again. Then Nora's phone rang. She looked at the screen. Unknown number with a Phoenix area code. She almost didn't answer, but something made her hit accept. This is Nora Hayes. Ms. Hayes, this is Detective Sarah Lynn with Phoenix PD. I'm calling about the incident at Mercy Ridge Medical Center last night involving Staff Sergeant Ryan Cole. We have some questions about the circumstances surrounding his admission and treatment. Nora's blood went cold. Questions? There are irregularities in the medical records, discrepancies between the paramedic report and what actually happened in the trauma bay. We're conducting a preliminary investigation into whether proper protocols were followed. Lynn's voice was professionally neutral. We'd like you to come down to the station to give a statement. Am I being accused of something? Not at this time, but we do need to establish a timeline of events. Staff Sergeant Cole was injured in what appears to have been a targeted attack. The IED that wounded him was placed specifically to damage his vehicle. We believe he may have been deliberately targeted, and we need to understand everyone who had contact with him after he arrived at the hospital. Nora felt Brennan watching her. I'm a nurse, detective. I treated his injuries, that's all. I understand, but your military background creates some complications. We need to rule out any possibility that last night's events were part of a larger situation involving military personnel or classified operations. A pause. I'm sure you understand why we have to be thorough. When do you need me? Today would be preferable. Say 2 p.m. I'll be there. Nora ended the call. Brennan was staring at her. Police? He asked. They think Cole might have been targeted. They're investigating everyone who treated him. She stood up. Including me. That's insane. You saved his life. Doesn't matter. I'm a former combat medic with a partially classified service record who just happened to be working the night a wounded Marine came in asking for military personnel only. Nora laughed without humor. From their perspective, that looks suspicious as hell. But it's coincidence. Is it? Nora pulled out her phone, started scrolling through messages she'd been ignoring. One from Colonel Vance caught her eye. She opened it, read it, and felt her stomach drop. Cole wasn't just any Marine, Chuan. He's been working as a security contractor for the DoD, and the IED that hit him used components that matched devices from Afghanistan. Brennan went pale. Someone followed him back from a war zone? Or someone wanted to silence him before he could talk about something he saw over there. Nora showed him the message. Vance is saying the Army Criminal Investigation Division is opening their own investigation. They want to interview everyone who had access to Cole last night, including you, especially me. Nora pocketed her phone. Because I'm the one person in that trauma bay who might have recognized the shrapnel pattern. Who might have known what kind of IED created those wounds? Who might have been able to connect it back to specific operations in Afghanistan? Can you? Nora didn't answer. She walked out of the chapel, leaving Brennan sitting alone in the quiet. Because the truth was, she could. She'd seen those exact wound patterns before. In Kabul. In the building that had collapsed on top of her squad. In the explosion that had killed 12 soldiers and officially killed her too. Someone had used the same bomb design on Ryan Cole. And if the police and the army were both investigating, that meant someone thought last night wasn't just about a wounded Marine getting lucky. It meant someone thought Nora Hayes might be the real target. The hallway outside the chapel was empty except for one figure leaning against the wall. Sergeant Martinez pushed off when she saw Nora, fell into step beside her. "You got the call too," Martinez said. It wasn't a question. "Police want a statement. You?" "CID wants everything. Service records, deployment history, everyone I've had contact with since leaving active duty." Martinez's jaw was tight. They're treating this like a terrorism investigation, which means they think whoever hit Cole might hit again. They think it's connected to Kabul. Don't you? Nora stopped walking. They were near a window overlooking the parking lot where morning sun was turning every car roof into a mirror. The IED pattern matches. The targeting, the placement, the fragmentation spread. It's the same design that hit our convoy. But that was 5 years ago. Why now? Why Cole? Maybe because he survived. Maybe because he knows something someone doesn't want him talking about. Nora turned to look at Martinez. "What do you remember from that night, before the building collapsed?" Martinez's eyes went distant. "Fire. Explosions. You working on people faster than should have been possible, telling us to stay calm, to keep pressure on wounds, to keep each other awake." She paused. "And then that last blast. The big one. The building came down and everything went black. And when I woke up, you were gone, and they said you were dead, and we were being shipped home, and nobody would answer questions about what happened." "What kind of questions?" "About why our convoy was in that sector in the first place. About why we weren't given proper intelligence about IED activity in the area. About why it took 6 hours for evac to arrive when we were only 20 clicks from base." Martinez's voice dropped. "They shut down the inquiry, classified the whole operation, told us to stop asking questions and move on with our lives." Nora's phone buzzed again. Another text from Vance. "Board meeting postponed. Police requested access to hospital records. Things are escalating." "They're going to want to know why you're here," Martinez said quietly. "In Phoenix, working in this specific hospital. The same hospital where Cole ended up after being attacked." "It's coincidence." "You don't believe in coincidence, neither do I." Martinez moved closer, lowered her voice. "What if you weren't hiding from the past? What if you were running from something that's been chasing you this whole time? And what if last night it finally caught up?" Before Nora could answer, the fire alarm screamed to life throughout the hospital. The fire alarm shrieked through Mercy Ridge Medical Center like something dying. Nora's combat instincts kicked in before her conscious mind registered the sound. She was already moving, already scanning exits, already calculating evacuation routes while everyone else was still processing what was happening. "That's not a drill," Martinez said, her hand already on her sidearm. "How do you know?" "Because drills don't happen during shift change when the hospital's at maximum capacity." Martinez was moving too, heading toward the stairwell. "And they don't happen 20 minutes after the police start asking questions about targeted attacks." Nora grabbed her arm. "Cole? ICU, 3rd floor." They ran. The stairwell was already filling with people, nurses, patients in wheelchairs, visitors clutching confused children. The overhead sprinklers hadn't activated yet, which meant either the fire was small or the alarm was false, or something worse. Nora pushed through the crowd, Martinez right behind her, both of them taking stairs 3 at a time. The 3rd floor ICU was chaos. Nurses were disconnecting patients from monitors, preparing to move anyone stable enough for evacuation. The unstable ones, the ones on ventilators, the ones in induced comas, the ones like Cole who just had major surgery, those were the problem. Moving them meant risking their lives. Not moving them meant leaving them in a burning building. Nora found Dr. Patel in the hallway, coordinating the evacuation with the kind of controlled panic that made him look 10 years older. "Where's the fire?" she demanded. 4th floor, west wing. Hospital security is saying it's contained but spreading." Patel was checking his tablet, pulling up patient charts. We've got 6 ICU patients who can't be moved safely. Cole's one of them. He's barely 12 hours post-op. If we disconnect him from the ventilator and try to carry him down 4 flights of stairs, Baraski, he'll code before we hit the 2nd floor. Nora looked past him toward Cole's room. Through the window, she could see him still unconscious, still hooked to machines that were keeping him alive. What about the elevators? Protocol says no elevators during fire evacuation. Protocol also says don't leave patients to burn. Nora was already moving toward Cole's room. Martinez, get hospital security on the line. I need to know exactly where that fire is and how fast it's spreading. Patel, start prepping portable ventilation units for the patients who can't breathe on their own. You're not authorized to— Do I look like I care about authorization right now? Patel stared at her for half a second, then started shouting orders to the ICU nurses. Nora pushed into Cole's room. The monitors were still beeping steadily. Heart rate, oxygen saturation, blood pressure all stable. She checked his chest tube drainage, his IV lines, the surgical site. Everything looked good. Too good to risk destroying by moving him before his body was ready. Her phone rang. Detective Lynn. Ms. Hayes, we need you to stay where you are. Don't leave the building. There's a fire, detective, kind of planning to leave. The fire started in the hospital records room, 4th floor, West Wing. Lynn's voice was tight. The same room where we were pulling medical files related to Staff Sergeant Cole's admission last night. Nora felt ice slide down her spine. You think someone said it deliberately? I think it's a hell of a coincidence that the records room catches fire the same morning we start investigating a potential terrorism case. Background noise on Lynn's end, radio chatter, sirens, people shouting. We're treating this as a potential crime scene. That means nobody leaves until we've cleared the building and interviewed everyone who had access to those files. I had access, so did half the hospital staff, which is why we need everyone to stay put. Fire department says the blaze is under control. We're evacuating by floors, starting with 4 and working down. You're on 3, which means you've got maybe 20 minutes before we get to you. I've got ICU patients who can't wait 20 minutes. Then you better work fast. The call ended. Martinez appeared in the doorway. Security says the fire's not spreading. Looks like someone torched a bunch of files and bailed before the sprinklers kicked in. Professional job, fast, targeted, minimal collateral damage. They're destroying evidence, Nora said, or they're creating a distraction. Martinez moved to the window, looked down at the parking lot below. Check it out. Nora joined her. The parking lot was filling with evacuated hospital staff and patients, but that wasn't what Martinez was pointing at. At the far edge of the lot, near the maintenance entrance, a dark SUV sat idling. Tinted windows, out-of-state plates, engine running. Could be nothing, Nora said. Could be someone waiting to see who evacuates from the ICU. Martinez pulled out her phone, took a photo. I'm sending this to Vance. If someone's watching Cole, we need to know. Behind them, Cole stirred. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused, confused. His hand moved toward the ventilator tube in his throat, a bad sign. Patients who were aware of the tube usually tried to pull it out. Nora was at his side instantly. Hey, easy. Don't fight it. You're in the hospital. You're safe. Cole's eyes found hers. Recognition flickered. He tried to talk around the tube, failed, grabbed for the bedside pen and paper instead. His handwriting was shaky but legible. Fire? Small one. Contained. We're going to get you out of here. He wrote again. Not safe. They found me. Who found you? Same people. Kabul. They know I'm alive. Nora's blood went cold. What people, Cole? What did you see in Afghanistan? But Cole's eyes were already closing again, sedation pulling him back under. The pen fell from his hand. Martinez was reading over her shoulder. You think someone from Kabul followed him here? Or someone who doesn't want him talking about what happened there? Nora checked his vitals, still stable, but his heart rate had jumped. Stress response. Even unconscious, his body knew something was wrong. We need to move him somewhere secure, not just out of the building, somewhere the people in that SUV can't find him. The police won't believe us without proof. And by the time we convince them, whoever's in that SUV will have what they came for. Nora started disconnecting monitors, working with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done field evacuations under worse conditions. Help me get him ready to transport. Where are we taking him? Somewhere they won't think to look. Dr. Brennan appeared in the doorway, his face flushed from running. What the hell are you doing? We're evacuating, not relocating patients to... Someone just torched the records room. Nora cut him off. The same records room where police were pulling files about Cole's admission. And there's a suspicious vehicle in the parking lot that's been idling since the alarm went off. You want to wheel him downstairs into whatever ambush they've set up? Be my guest. But I'm getting him somewhere safe first. Brennan looked at Martinez, who nodded confirmation. She's right. This smells like a setup. So what's your plan? Steal a patient out of the ICU and hide him somewhere in the hospital? Not in the hospital. Nora had finished disconnecting everything except the ventilator and the central line. The old building, the one they closed last year for renovations. It's still connected through the basement tunnels. Brennan stared at her. How do you even know about that? I work night shifts. I know every corner of this place nobody else bothers with. She looked at him. You in or out? Because if you're out, I need you to go be somewhere else and forget you saw this. For 3 seconds, Brennan didn't move. Then he grabbed a portable ventilator from the supply closet. I'm going to regret this. Probably. They moved fast. Nora and Martinez handled the gurney, while Brennan managed the ventilator and IV lines. The hallway was still chaotic with evacuation, which meant nobody paid attention to one more patient being moved. They made it to the service elevator, the one the maintenance staff used, the one that still worked during fire alarms because it had its own power supply, and descended to the basement. The tunnels under Mercy Ridge were a relic from the 1970s, when the hospital had expanded and needed to connect new wings to old ones without making patients walk outside in Phoenix heat. Most of them were closed now, deemed too expensive to maintain. But the locks were simple, and Nora had spent enough sleepless nights walking these corridors to know which ones still had power. They emerged in the old West building 20 minutes later. The place smelled like dust and stale air and abandonment. Half the ceiling tiles were missing. The windows were boarded up. But the old ICU room on the second floor still had functioning oxygen ports and electrical outlets, and that was enough. This is insane, Brennan said, but he was already hooking Cole back up to the monitors. We're hiding a patient in a condemned building while the police are looking for him. The police are looking for a fire suspect, Martinez corrected. They don't know Cole's in danger yet. Then we tell them. And say what? That we have a hunch based on a parked SUV and a cryptic note from a sedated patient? Nora was checking Cole's vitals, making sure the transfer hadn't destabilized him. They'll think we're paranoid, or worse, they'll think we're involved. Her phone rang again. Colonel Vance this time. Hayes, where the hell are you? Hospital's being evacuated and you're not on any of the sign-out sheets. I'm somewhere safe with Cole. Define safe. Somewhere that isn't on any official hospital maps. She could hear Vance's breathing change, recognition, understanding, maybe approval. Someone set that fire deliberately, sir, and I think they did it to flush Cole out of the ICU where he'd be vulnerable. CID agrees with you. They're reviewing security footage now. Background noise again. But here's the problem. Detective Lynn is treating you as a person of interest. She thinks you might have started that fire to destroy evidence of your own involvement. My involvement in what? In whatever happened to Cole. She's building a theory that you're connected to the original attack, that you were waiting for him to show up at this hospital, that the whole combat medic reunion was staged. Vance's voice dropped. She's also looking into why you were in Phoenix specifically. Why this hospital? Why you've been moving around the Southwest for 5 years in a pattern that matches reported domestic terrorism activity. Nora's hands went numb. That's insane. That's a detective doing her job. And right now her job is finding out if a former combat medic with PTSD and a classified service record is running some kind of revenge operation against military personnel. A pause. You need to come in, Hayes. Talk to her. Clear this up before it turns into a manhunt. I can't. Not until Cole's safe. He's safe in police custody. No, he's not. He's a target, and whoever's after him has enough reach to set fire to a hospital and make it look like an accident. You think a police holding cell is going to stop people like that? Nora looked at Martinez, who was standing guard by the door. I need 12 hours, Colonel. 12 hours to figure out who's after him and why. I can't give you 12 hours. Lynn's already got a warrant being drafted. Then draft it. But I'm not moving Cole until I know he's actually safe, not just officially protected. She ended the call before Vance could argue. Brennan was staring at her. Did you just hang up on a colonel? He'll get over it. And when the police show up with that warrant, they have to find us first. Martinez's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and her face went pale. We've got a problem. That SUV just left the parking lot. Security footage shows it headed toward the Old West building. They know we're here? Either that or they're checking every possible location. Martinez was already moving toward the window, peering through gaps in the boards. How many exits does this building have? 3. Main entrance, emergency exit on the south side, and the basement tunnel we came through. So they can cover all of them with 3 people. We're trapped. Nora thought fast. The old building was a maze of empty rooms and closed wards, but it was also a death trap. No security, no backup, no way to call for help without giving away their position. Cole couldn't be moved again without serious risk. And if someone was coming for him, they had maybe 10 minutes before this turned into a combat situation. We need weapons, she said. Brennan laughed nervously. This is a hospital, not an armory. It's a hospital that's been sitting empty for a year, which means maintenance supplies, chemical storage, and probably a bunch of equipment nobody bothered to clear out. Nora was already moving, pulling open cabinets. Martinez, you're armed? Service pistol. 15 rounds, not exactly equipped for a firefight. It's better than nothing. Nora found what she was looking for, a fire extinguisher, a box of scalpels still in sterile packaging, and a container of medical-grade alcohol. Brennan, you know how to start an IV? Of course, but then you stay with Cole. Keep him stable. If anyone comes through that door who isn't Martinez or me, you disconnect everything and get him out through the window. There's a fire escape on the south wall. And drop him 3 stories? Better than letting them kill him. She thrust the scalpels and alcohol into her pockets. Not much, but enough to make someone think twice about coming at her. Martinez, you're with me. We're going to see who's driving that SUV. They moved through the abandoned building like ghosts, using stairwells that groaned under their weight and hallways where the only light came from gaps in the boarded windows. Nora's heart was hammering, but her hands were steady. This was familiar territory, not the building, but the situation, the waiting, the not knowing if the next corner would bring violence or nothing. She'd done this before, in Kabul, in Kandahar, in a dozen places where the enemy wore civilian clothes and you didn't know you were in a firefight until someone started shooting. They reached the main entrance just as the SUV pulled up outside. 3 people got out, 2 men, 1 woman, all wearing tactical clothing that tried very hard to look civilian but didn't quite succeed. No visible weapons, but that didn't mean anything. One of them pulled out a phone, made a call, spoke too quietly for Nora to hear. Martinez breathed a curse. Those are contractors. Private security. Look at the way they're moving. Perimeter check. Overlapping fields of fire. Constant comms. Military trained. Worse, Blackwater trained. Or whatever they're calling themselves these days. Martinez pulled her sidearm, kept it low and ready. These aren't amateurs. If they're here for Cole, they're not going to be deterred by a locked door. The woman made a hand signal. The 2 men moved toward opposite sides of the building, covering the exits exactly like Nora had predicted. The woman stayed at the main entrance, pulled something from her jacket. Lockpicks. They're coming in, Nora whispered. We can't fight 3 contractors with 1 pistol and a fire extinguisher. We don't have to fight them. We just have to slow them down long enough for backup to arrive. What backup? Nora pulled out her phone, dialed 911. When the operator answered, she kept her voice steady and clear. This is Nurse Nora Hayes at Mercy Ridge Medical Center. I'm in the Old West building with a patient who's being targeted by armed intruders. We need police response immediately. Ma'am, can you describe the intruders? 3 individuals, tactical clothing, possibly armed. They're attempting to break into the building now. Are you in immediate danger? Yes. Officers are being dispatched. Stay on the line. Nora didn't stay on the line. She ended the call and turned to Martinez. Police response time in this area is about 8 minutes. We need to hold them off for 8 minutes. And if we can't, then we find out if I remember how to fight. The lock clicked. The door swung open. The woman entered first, moving with the fluid economy of someone who'd done 1,000 room clearances. She scanned the lobby, saw nothing, signaled her team. The two men entered behind her, spreading out automatically. Nora and Martinez were already gone, moving up the stairwell to the second floor. They could hear the contractors below, searching methodically. Opening doors, checking rooms, getting closer. "They know we're here," Martinez whispered. "They're not just searching. They're hunting." "Let them hunt." Nora positioned herself at the top of the stairs, fire extinguisher in hand. It was a terrible weapon, short range, non-lethal, more for distraction than damage. But it was what she had. "When they come up, I'll hit them with this. You cover me." "With what?" "I can't shoot someone for searching an abandoned building, not without proof they're actually a threat." "Then we get proof." Footsteps on the stairs. Slow, careful, professional. The woman appeared first, weapon drawn now. A compact pistol, held in a two-handed grip that spoke of serious training. She saw Nora and Martinez at the same instant they saw her. For one frozen second, nobody moved. Then the woman smiled. "Lieutenant Hayes." "Been a long time." Nora's blood turned to ice. "Do I know you?" "Kabul, 2019. You were treating wounded from our convoy when the building came down." The woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I was the only one who saw you get pulled out of the rubble alive. Everyone else thought you were dead, but I knew better." "Who are you?" "Someone who's been cleaning up loose ends from that operation for 5 years. You were supposed to be end number 12, but here you are, still breathing, still saving lives." She raised her weapon slightly. "Still protecting Ryan Cole, who should have died in that IED attack yesterday." Martinez's pistol came up. "Drop it." "I don't think so, Sergeant Martinez. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and about 30 seconds away from my team flanking your position. Put down the weapon and we can all walk away from this." "What do you want with Cole?" Nora demanded. "Same thing I wanted with the rest of your squad." Silence. "He saw something in Kabul he wasn't supposed to see. So did you. The difference is, we thought you were already dead." The woman's finger moved to the trigger. "Time to correct that mistake." Nora pulled the pin on the fire extinguisher and sprayed. The hallway filled with white chemical fog. The woman fired blind, bullets punching through drywall. Martinez returned fire, 3 controlled shots that sent the woman diving for cover. Nora was already moving, pulling Martinez toward Cole's room, slamming the door behind them. Brennan was standing over Cole with a scalpel in his hand, looking terrified. "What the hell is happening?" "They're here for him." Nora grabbed the gurney. "Window, now." "You said 3 stories." "I lied. It's 2. And there's a dumpster full of construction debris right below. We can lower him down." More gunfire in the hallway. The door wouldn't hold long. They got Cole to the window, broke out the remaining glass, looked down. The fire escape was rusted but intact. The dumpster was exactly where Nora remembered, maybe 15 feet below, filled with old insulation and drywall. "This is insane," Brennan said. "You keep saying that." Nora was already unhooking Cole from the portable ventilator, switching him to a bag valve mask. "But you're still here, so either help me or get out of the way." They lowered Cole through the window as gunfire erupted behind them. The door exploded inward. Martinez emptied her magazine in controlled bursts, buying seconds. Brennan and Nora guided the gurney down the fire escape, metal groaning under the weight. They were 6 feet from the dumpster when the fire escape gave out. The entire structure pulled away from the wall with a sound like tearing metal. Nora grabbed Cole's gurney, felt herself falling, hit the dumpster hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. Pain exploded through her shoulder. The gurney slammed down beside her, somehow staying upright, Cole still strapped to it. Above them, Martinez was still firing, then silence. "Martinez!" Nora screamed. No answer. Brennan landed beside her in the dumpster, gasping. "We have to move. They're coming." Nora forced herself upright. Her shoulder was either dislocated or badly bruised. She couldn't tell which. Didn't matter. She grabbed one end of the gurney. Brennan took the other. They ran. Sirens in the distance, getting closer. The police response Nora had called for. Finally arriving, but maybe too late. They made it 50 yards before the SUV cut them off. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, weapon raised. "Stop." Nora stopped. Brennan stopped. Cole lay between them, unconscious and vulnerable. "Step away from the patient," the man said. "No," Nora said. "I wasn't asking." "Then shoot me." "But you're not touching him." The man's finger tightened on the trigger. Behind him, the hospital's main building doors exploded open. Colonel Vance emerged with a squad of MPs, weapons drawn. Detective Lynn right behind them, shouting commands. The man with the gun turned, saw he was surrounded, made a choice. He ran. His team scattered. The SUV peeled out, tires screaming. The police gave chase. And in the chaos, Nora collapsed beside Cole's gurney, her body finally giving out after running on adrenaline and fear. Someone was shaking her. Brennan. Stay with me. You might have a concussion. Cole? Alive, stable, still breathing. Vance appeared, kneeling beside her. That was the stupidest, bravest thing I've ever seen. You know that? They knew me, Nora whispered. The woman, she was in Kabul. She said I was supposed to be loose end number 12. Vance's expression went hard. What else did she say? That Cole saw something he wasn't supposed to see. That we all did. Nora's vision was blurring. What happened in Kabul, Colonel? What were we really doing there? But before Vance could answer, someone else arrived. A man in a suit with federal ID clipped to his belt. He looked at Nora, at Cole, at the destruction around them. Lieutenant Nora Hayes, he said. Just Nora. Special Agent Marcus Webb, FBI. We've been investigating the Kabul incident for 3 years. We think you and Staff Sergeant Cole are the last surviving witnesses to a war crime. He crouched beside her. And someone very powerful wants to make sure you never testify about what you saw. Nora closed her eyes. Her shoulder was screaming, her head was pounding, and somewhere in the back of her mind she could hear explosions and smell burning flesh and see 12 bodies she couldn't save. I don't remember what I saw, she whispered. Then we need to help you remember, Webb said. Because without your testimony, the people responsible for Kabul are going to walk free. Behind him, Detective Lynn was reading someone their rights. Martinez appeared, bloodied but alive, being helped by paramedics. Brennan was checking Cole's vitals with shaking hands, and Nora lay in the dirt outside an abandoned hospital building, realizing that 5 years of hiding had just ended. The woman who'd attacked them was gone, but she'd left something behind, a message carved into the wall of Cole's room, visible through the broken window. 12 died in Kabul. 2 more won't change anything. The FBI field office in downtown Phoenix looked exactly like every federal building Nora had ever been inside. Industrial carpet, fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick, and the faint smell of burned coffee and bureaucracy. Special Agent Webb led her down a corridor lined with closed doors, each one hiding some investigation she'd never know about. Her shoulder was wrapped in a compression bandage. The ER doctor had confirmed it was badly bruised but not dislocated. He'd offered painkillers. She'd refused. She needed to stay sharp. Webb stopped at a conference room, held the door open. Inside sat Colonel Vance, Detective Lynn, and 2 people Nora didn't recognize. A woman in her 50s wearing a DoD identification badge, and a younger man with the kind of haircut that screamed military intelligence. Lieutenant Hayes, the woman said, standing. I'm Deputy Director Karen Ashford, Defense Criminal Investigative Service. This is Agent Tom Rivera, NCIS. We've been waiting 5 years to have this conversation. Nora sat down carefully, favoring her good shoulder. Then you've been waiting 4 years and 11 months longer than necessary. You could have asked me any time. We didn't know you were alive until yesterday. Ashford opened a file folder, spread photographs across the table. Nora recognized them instantly. The building in Kabul, the convoy wreckage, the aftermath. The official record says you died when the structure collapsed. Your body was never recovered. Every surviving member of your unit confirmed you were still inside when it came down. They were wrong. No, they were lied to. Rivera leaned forward. You were pulled out of that rubble by a team that wasn't supposed to be there. A private military contractor unit operating without proper authorization. They got you out, they got you to a field hospital, and then they made you disappear. Nora's hands clenched under the table. Why? Because you saw something during the evacuation. Something that made you a liability. Webb pulled up a video on his laptop, turned it toward her. We recovered this from a damaged camera in the convoy. It's partial, corrupted, but it shows what happened before the building collapsed. He hit play. The footage was grainy, time-stamped August 2019, showing the interior of a military transport vehicle. Voices shouting in the chaos. Then the camera angle shifted. Someone had dropped it, and it was filming through a cracked windshield. Nora watched herself on screen, younger, covered in blood, working on a wounded soldier. Behind her, two men in contractor gear were arguing with someone in an officer's uniform. She couldn't hear the words, but she could see the anger, the pointing, the sudden violence when one contractor grabbed the officer and shoved him against the wall. Then the explosion. The building coming down. The screen going black. What you're seeing, Ashford said quietly, is the moment before a war crime was committed. Those contractors weren't there to help evacuate wounded. They were there to eliminate witnesses to an illegal operation. The officer they were arguing with was Captain David Morrison, Army Intelligence. He discovered that the contractors were running unauthorized weapons through that sector, selling military-grade hardware to local militias. Nora felt sick. Morrison was in the building when it collapsed. Along with 12 enlisted personnel who'd been helping evacuate wounded from your convoy. Morrison tried to stop the contractors from destroying evidence. They responded by calling in an airstrike on a building full of American soldiers. Rivera's voice was hard. Then they blamed it on enemy fire, classified the whole operation, buried the investigation. But you survived, Webb said. And so did Ryan Cole. Which means there are two witnesses who can testify that those 12 soldiers died because contractors wanted to cover up illegal arms trafficking. The room went silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. Nora looked at the faces around the table. Federal agents who'd spent years building a case, waiting for evidence that would stick, needing her to be the key that unlocked everything. Who were they? She asked. The contractors. Sentinel Strategic Group, private military corporation with contracts in 14 countries. Revenue of about $800 million annually. Very connected, very protected. Ashford pulled out another photo. A professional headshot of a man in his 60s, silver hair, expensive suit. CEO is a man named Richard Caldwell, former Marine Corps colonel, Pentagon connections, major political donor. Untouchable by normal standards. Not anymore, Rivera added. Not if we can prove his people murdered American soldiers to hide criminal activity. Nora stared at the photo. The woman who came after Cole and me today, she said I was loose end number 12. Her name is Diana Cross. Former Special Forces, worked for Sentinel since 2017. She's been cleaning up evidence of Kabul for 5 years, paying off witnesses, intimidating investigators, and when necessary, making people disappear. Webb pulled up another file. We've connected her to 4 suspicious deaths in the last 3 years. All former military personnel who served in Afghanistan. All officially ruled accidents or suicides. She's killing the people who were there. Everyone who might remember what really happened, yes. Cole survived the IED attack by pure luck. His vehicle took the blast at an angle that should have killed him but didn't. Cross had to improvise by setting the hospital fire, trying to finish the job while making it look like he died from complications. Ashford's expression hardened. And when that failed, she came after you directly. Detective Lynn spoke for the first time. Which brings us to the immediate problem. Cross is still out there. So are at least 2 other Sentinel contractors. They know you're alive, they know you're talking to us, and they know you can destroy their entire operation with one testimony. So what do you want from me? Nora asked. We want you to testify before a grand jury, Ashford said. We want you to tell them what you saw in Kabul, what happened during that evacuation, and how those 12 soldiers died. With your testimony and Cole's, we can indict Caldwell and dismantle Sentinel completely. And until then, you're in protective custody. So is Cole. Webb closed his laptop. We've moved him to a secure medical facility. Federal protection, armed guards, complete lockdown. Nobody gets near him without clearance. Nora looked at Vance, who'd been silent through the entire briefing. You knew about this. I knew there were questions about Kabul. I didn't know the full scope until yesterday. His voice was careful. But I knew you were running from something. That's why I never pushed you to explain why you left the service or where you'd been. I figured you'd tell me when you were ready. I wasn't ever going to be ready. And yet here we are. The door opened. Dr. Brennan entered, looking exhausted and out of place in his surgical scrubs among all the federal agents. He saw Nora and something in his expression softened. They said you were here. I wanted to check on your shoulder. It's fine. It's not fine. You fell 15 feet onto construction debris. He turned to the agents. How much longer do you need her? because she needs proper medical attention and probably about 12 hours of sleep. We're done for now, Ashford said, but Lieutenant Hayes needs to understand the stakes. Once this becomes public, once we file charges against Sentinel, she becomes the most important witness in a federal war crimes investigation. Every news outlet in the country will want to interview her. Every defense attorney will try to discredit her. And Richard Caldwell will throw every resource he has into making her look unreliable. Good luck with that, Brennan said flatly. I've watched her work. Anyone who tries to call her unreliable hasn't seen what she can do under pressure. Ashford smiled slightly. Nevertheless, she needs to be prepared. This won't be quiet. This won't be easy. And it won't end quickly. Nora stood up, wincing as her shoulder protested. When do I testify? Grand jury convenes in 6 days. We'll prep you beforehand. Go over your testimony. Prepare you for cross-examination. Make sure you're ready. Rivera handed her a business card. Until then, you don't go anywhere without protection. Agent Webb will coordinate your security detail. I have patience. I have a job. Had a job, Detective Lynn corrected. Hospital administrator put you on administrative leave pending the investigation into the fire. Standard procedure when staff are involved in potential criminal activity. The words hit harder than Nora expected. I didn't start that fire. I know, but the hospital doesn't know that yet, and they're covering their liability. Lynn's expression wasn't unkind. For what it's worth, I don't think you're involved in anything except being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But my job is following evidence, and the evidence currently looks complicated. Nora turned to leave, then stopped. The message Cross left in Cole's room, 12 died in Kabul, 2 more won't change anything. She's telling us she's not done. We know, Webb said. Which is why you're not leaving this building without a protection detail. Outside the conference room, Brennan caught up with her. You okay? Define okay. Vertical breathing, not actively bleeding. Then I'm okay. Nora kept walking, heading toward the exit. 2 agents fell into step behind her, her new shadows, apparently. Thanks for backing me up in there. I wasn't backing you up, I was stating facts. Brennan matched her pace. You saved Cole's life twice in 24 hours. You identified threats nobody else saw. You did things I've never seen a nurse do, and I've worked with trauma nurses for 2 decades. He paused. And I still don't know why you were hiding all of that. Because being good at something doesn't mean you want to keep doing it forever. They reached the building entrance. Outside, Phoenix was drowning in afternoon heat, the kind that made asphalt shimmer and turned car interiors into ovens. A black SUV waited at the curb, federal plates, tinted windows, exactly the kind of vehicle that screamed official protection. Where are they taking you? Brennan asked. Safe house, probably. Somewhere Diana Cross can't find me. Nora looked back at him. What about the hospital? What are people saying? That you're a hero? That you're a criminal? That you're a ghost who shouldn't exist? He managed a tired smile. Mostly they're confused. The quiet night nurse who never caused problems is suddenly at the center of a federal investigation involving war crimes and assassins. It's a lot to process. Tell me about it. One of the protection agents opened the SUV door. Nora started to get in, then stopped. Brennan? When this is over, if I'm still employed, I'm going to need someone to vouch that I'm not completely insane. You have my number, he said. Use it. She got in the SUV. It pulled away from the curb, leaving Brennan standing on the sidewalk in his surgical scrubs, looking like he'd just watched someone walk into a war. The safe house was a nondescript ranch in Scottsdale, surrounded by high walls and surveillance cameras. Inside looked like a furniture catalog, generic, functional, designed for short-term occupation. Agent Webb gave her a quick tour, showed her where everything was, then left 2 agents on perimeter duty. Get some rest, he said. We'll start prep sessions tomorrow morning. Nora didn't rest. She sat on the edge of a bed that wasn't hers in a house that wasn't home, staring at her phone. 7 missed calls from reporters, 15 text messages from people she barely knew, and 1 message from Martinez. They're saying you're a hero. Personally, I think you're just crazy, but I'm glad you're alive. She was about to respond when the phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Hayes. Lieutenant? The voice was female, calm, familiar. Diana Cross. I'm impressed. Most people don't survive falling through a fire escape. Nora's blood went cold. How did you get this number? I have access to resources you can't imagine. Federal safe houses, witness protection details, encrypted communication channels. Your FBI friends think they can hide you. They're wrong. A pause. I want to offer you a deal. Not interested. You haven't heard it yet. Walk away from the grand jury testimony. Claim memory loss, PTSD, unreliable recollection. I don't care what excuse you use, just don't testify against Sentinel. Do that, and I'll make sure you and Cole live through this. And if I refuse, then I finish what I started in Kabul, and this time I'll make sure there's no rubble to hide under. Cross's voice hardened. You think federal protection will save you? I killed 4 witnesses in the last 3 years. 3 of them were in protective custody. The FBI can't stop me, Lieutenant. Nobody can. You done threatening me? That wasn't a threat. That was a promise. The line went dead. Nora sat there for 5 seconds, forcing her breathing to steady. Then she called Webb. Cross just contacted me. She threatened me if I testify. Webb cursed. How did she get your number? She said she has access to federal systems. She knows where I am. That's impossible. This location is classified. Then she's got someone inside feeding her information. Nora stood up, started pacing. You need to move me. Now. We will. But first we need to figure out how she got that number. Webb's voice was tight with controlled anger. Don't leave the house. Don't answer any more calls. I'm sending additional security. Nora ended the call and looked out the window. The protection agents were still in position, watching the perimeter. But if Cross had access to federal systems, if she had someone inside providing intelligence, then those agents might as well be standing in front of targets painted on their backs. She was about to call Webb back when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Footsteps on the roof. Nora moved fast, grabbing the nearest weapon she could find, a kitchen knife from the block on the counter. Not much against trained contractors, but better than nothing. She moved to the hallway, pressed against the wall, listened. The footsteps moved. Quiet. Professional. Someone who knew how to breach a building without announcing their presence. The skylight in the living room shattered. Glass rained down. A figure dropped through, landed in a combat crouch, weapon raised. Not Cross. One of the men from earlier, the one who'd held them at gunpoint before the police arrived. Nora didn't give him time to orient. She rushed him, drove the knife toward his weapon hand. He blocked, twisted, threw her into the wall hard enough to rattle her teeth. Her injured shoulder screamed. He raised his weapon. The front door exploded inward. The protection agents rushed in, weapons drawn. Drop it! The contractor spun, fired twice. Both agents went down. Nora grabbed a lamp, threw it. It hit him in the head, staggered him. She followed with a kick to his knee that she'd learned in basic training, felt something give. He went down hard. She was on him instantly, driving her knee into his back, twisting his weapon arm until he dropped the gun. Training from 8 years ago coming back like muscle memory, how to restrain, how to control, how to survive. The contractor bucked, trying to throw her off. Nora grabbed his head, slammed it into the floor once. He went still. She grabbed his weapon, trained it on him, checked the agents. Both bleeding but alive. Body armor had caught the rounds. One was already calling for backup, voice tight with pain. The contractor groaned, tried to move. Nora pressed the gun barrel against the base of his skull. Where's Cross? Go to hell. Wrong answer. She pressed harder. You came here to kill me. I'm well within my rights to claim self-defense if you don't cooperate. So let's try again. Where's Diana Cross? The contractor laughed, blood in his teeth. You think this was about killing you? This was about proving a point. We can get to you anywhere, anytime, and your FBI protection can't do anything to stop us. Except I'm still breathing and you're face down on my floor. For now. Sirens outside. Backup arriving. The contractor went quiet, knowing he'd already lost. Agent Webb burst through the door 3 minutes later, saw the scene, and went pale. How did they find this location? You've got a leak, Nora said flatly. Someone in your organization is feeding Sentinel information. Phone numbers, safe house locations, probably everything else they need to stay one step ahead. Webb looked at the contractor, at the wounded agents, at the destroyed safe house. We're moving you, different location, smaller team. Need to know only. No. Excuse me? I said no. You moved me. The leak just follows. You put me in another safe house. Cross will find it in 6 hours. Nora handed him the weapon. I want to go somewhere she won't think to look. Where? The hospital. Back to Mercy Ridge. Put me in a regular room. Don't tell anyone except the people who absolutely need to know. Let Cross think you've moved me somewhere federal and secure while I'm hiding in plain sight. Webb stared at her. That's insane. That's tactical. She's looking for federal protection details and classified locations. She's not looking for a nurse going back to work at the hospital where this started. Nora met his eyes. And I want to see Cole. I want to make sure he's actually safe and not just theoretically protected by people who can't even secure a safe house. Cole's in a military hospital, Fort Huachuca. Colonel Vance is overseeing his security personally. Then take me there instead. Webb looked like he wanted to argue. Then he looked at the destruction around them, the shattered skylight, the blood on the floor, the evidence that federal protection wasn't worth much against determined contractors with inside information. Fine, he said, but you're getting a tracking device and a panic button. And if anything happens, you hit that button and every federal agent in Arizona descends on your location. Clear? Clear. They left the safe house within the hour. The wounded agents were evacuated to a hospital. The contractor was taken into federal custody. And Nora climbed into yet another SUV, heading toward Fort Huachuca and the answers she'd spent 5 years avoiding. Cole was awake when she arrived. He was in a private room in the base hospital, hooked up to fewer machines now, looking stronger but still fragile. His eyes widened when he saw her. Ma'am, they said you were in protective custody. I was. It didn't take. Nora pulled up a chair, sat down carefully. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by an IED and survived twice. So, better than expected. He tried to smile, winced. They told me what happened. The fire, the contractors, the fact that you basically fought off an assassination team to keep me alive. Martinez helped. Martinez had a gun. You had a fire extinguisher in pure spite. Cole's expression sobered. They also told me about Kabul, about what we witnessed, about why Cross is trying to kill us. What do you remember? More than I wish I did. He looked down at his hands. I remember Morrison arguing with those contractors. I remember him saying they were running weapons, that he was going to report them. I remember one of them pulling a gun. His voice dropped. And I remember the explosion that wasn't supposed to happen, the one that came from above, not from enemy positions. They called in an airstrike on their own people, to destroy evidence, to eliminate witnesses. Cole's hands clenched into fists. 12 soldiers died because some corporate mercenaries wanted to protect their illegal weapons deals. And they got away with it because everyone who could testify was either dead or disappeared. Not everyone, Nora said quietly. We're still here. For how long? Cross isn't going to stop. Sentinel isn't going to stop. They've got too much at stake, which is why we testify. Why we make sure those 12 soldiers didn't die for nothing. Nora leaned forward. I ran for 5 years, Cole. I hid and pretended to be someone else and convinced myself that forgetting was the same as healing. But it's not. And the only way to actually move forward is to make sure the truth comes out. Cole studied her face. You sound different than you did last night. Last night I was a nurse trying to save a patient. Today I'm a witness trying to finish a war. She stood up. The grand jury meets in 6 days. Are you strong enough to testify? I'll crawl to that courthouse if I have to. Good. Nora moved toward the door, then stopped. Cole, the people we lost in Kabul, do you remember their names? Every single one. Me too. She left him there, surrounded by security and machines and the weight of memories neither of them could escape. In the hallway, Colonel Vance was waiting. The FBI is going to want you back in protective custody, he said. Let them want. I'm staying close to Cole until the testimony. The leak Webb mentioned. Any idea who it might be? Someone with access to federal databases and communication systems? Someone who can track witness locations and movements? Nora paused. Someone who's been inside the investigation from the beginning. Vance's expression darkened. You think it's one of the agents? I think Sentinel has 800 million reasons to buy cooperation, and I think whoever's feeding Cross information has been doing it for years. If you're right, then everything about this investigation is compromised, which is why we need to move fast. 6 days until the grand jury. We get there, we testify, we put everything on record before Sentinel can stop us. Vance nodded slowly. I'll have MPs stationed with Cole around the clock. Nobody gets near him without going through military security. Not FBI, not DOD, nobody. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when this is over and you're both still breathing. Nora left Fort Huachuca as the sun was setting over the Arizona desert, painting everything in shades of gold and red. In 6 days, she would stand in front of a grand jury and tell them about the worst night of her life, about 12 soldiers who died, about contractors who killed them, about 5 years of running that were finally over. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You should have taken the deal. Now you've made this personal. No signature. Didn't need one. Nora deleted the message and looked out the window at the desert rushing past. Somewhere out there, Diana Cross was planning her next move. Somewhere in a federal office, a leak was feeding her information. And somewhere in a corporate headquarters, Richard Caldwell was making phone calls and pulling strings and doing everything in his power to make sure the truth about Kabul stayed buried. But Nora Hayes had spent 5 years being invisible. She was done hiding. And the people who'd tried to kill her twice were about to learn what happened when you pushed a combat medic too far. 6 days until the grand jury. 6 days until everything came into the light. 6 days until justice or death. In her pocket, the panic button Webb had given her felt like a promise and a threat. One press and help would come. But help hadn't saved those 12 soldiers in Kabul. Help hadn't stopped Cross from killing 4 witnesses. Sometimes help arrived too late, which meant that when Cross came for her again, and she would come, Nora needed to be ready to fight back. Not as a nurse, not as a victim, but as the soldier she'd tried to stop being 5 years ago. The one who'd carried wounded men through gunfire and refused to leave anyone behind. The one who'd survived a building collapse and crawled out of the rubble alone. The one who knew exactly how much damage a person could take and keep fighting. That soldier was still there, buried under scrubs and silence in 5 years of running. And Diana Cross had just made the fatal mistake of waking her up. The next 4 days passed in a blur of preparation and paranoia. Nora spent her mornings at the FBI field office, going over testimony with prosecutors, her afternoons at Fort Huachuca checking on Cole's recovery, and her nights in a rotating series of hotel rooms that Agent Webb changed every 12 hours. She slept maybe 3 hours total, and even then her dreams were full of explosions and burning buildings and faces she couldn't save. On the 5th day, Webb called her into his office looking like he hadn't slept either. "We found the leak," he said without preamble. Nora sat down. "Who?" "Special Agent Jennifer Morse. She's been with the Bureau for 11 years, decorated career, access to every aspect of this investigation." Webb's jaw was tight. "She's also been on Sentinel's payroll for the last 3 years. $500,000 deposited into offshore accounts. Phone records show regular contact with Diana Cross." "Where is she now?" "In custody. Arrested 2 hours ago. She's already lawyered up, but we have enough evidence to put her away for decades." Webb pulled up a photo on his computer. A professional headshot of a woman in her 40s, blonde, competent looking. She gave Cross everything: safe house locations, witness identities, grand jury schedules. Every time we moved you, she told them where you'd be. Nora stared at the photo, feeling nothing, just exhaustion. "Does Cross know Morse was arrested?" "We're assuming yes, which means she knows her intelligence pipeline is cut off. She's operating blind now. Or she's desperate enough to make a move without inside information." Nora met Webb's eyes. "The grand jury testimony is tomorrow. If Cross is going to stop us, it has to be before then. Which is why we're moving both you and Cole to a federal courthouse tonight. Maximum security. No advance notice to anyone except the people in this room." Webb leaned forward. "Tomorrow morning, you testify. We get your statements on record. Then we arrest Richard Caldwell and start dismantling Sentinel piece by piece." "And Cross?" "We have warrants out for her and every Sentinel contractor involved in Kabul. The second they surface, we take them down." He paused. "But until then, you stay protected. No exceptions." That night, Nora rode in an armored transport to a federal courthouse in downtown Phoenix. Cole was transported separately from Fort Huachuca, arriving an hour later with a military escort that looked like it could repel a small army. They were housed in adjacent, secure rooms on the 3rd floor, guarded by federal marshals who checked every ID 3 times. Nora tried to sleep, failed. At 2 a.m., she was staring at the ceiling when someone knocked softly on her door. Hayes? It's Cole. She opened the door. He was standing there in hospital scrubs, one hand pressed to his healing chest, looking pale but determined. Behind him, a marshal watched with careful eyes. Couldn't sleep either? Nora asked. Keep thinking about tomorrow, about saying all of this out loud in front of strangers. Cole stepped inside when she gestured, and the marshal returned to his post in the hallway. I've spent 5 years trying not to think about Kabul. Now I have to remember every detail. That's what testimony is, making the invisible visible. You sound like you've done this before. I haven't, but I've spent 5 years running from it, and running is just another way of staying invisible. Nora sat down on the edge of the bed, wincing as her shoulder protested. Those 12 soldiers who died, they don't get to testify. They don't get to tell anyone what happened to them. So we do it for them. Cole sat down carefully beside her. Morrison, the officer who tried to stop the contractors. Did you know he had a family? I didn't. Wife and 2 daughters. They were told he died a hero in combat. They have no idea he was murdered by the people he was trying to expose. Cole's voice was rough. Tomorrow when we testify, they're going to find out the truth, and it's going to destroy the story they've been living with for 5 years. The truth destroys a lot of things, Nora said quietly, but lies destroy more. They sat in silence for a while, 2 survivors of a war crime that had been buried under classified reports and corporate money, waiting for dawn and the chance to finally tell someone what really happened. At 6 a.m., prosecutors arrived to do final prep. At 8 a.m., Nora was escorted to a conference room where a grand jury of 23 civilians waited to hear her testimony. The room was smaller than she'd expected, more intimate. The jury members looked like regular people, a mix of ages and backgrounds, all watching her with varying degrees of curiosity and concern. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Torres, guided Nora through her statement with questions that were direct but not cruel. What happened in Kabul? What did you see? What did Captain Morrison say to the contractors? What happened when the building collapsed? Nora answered everything. She described the convoy ambush, the evacuation, the wounded soldiers she'd been treating when Morrison confronted the contractors about illegal weapons sales. She described the argument, the violence, the moment when everything went wrong. Captain Morrison told them he was going to report what he'd discovered, Nora said, her voice steady. He told them that what they were doing was criminal and that American soldiers were dying because of it. And one of the contractors, a man whose face I'll never forget, pulled out a radio and called in coordinates for an airstrike. On your position? Torres asked. On the building where we'd taken shelter, where 14 American soldiers were treating wounded and trying to survive. Nora's hands clenched in her lap. Morrison tried to stop him. They fought, and then the building came down on top of all of us. How many survived? 2 that I know of, me and Staff Sergeant Ryan Cole. Everyone else died in the collapse, or the fire that followed. The grand jury room was completely silent. Torres pulled up photos on a screen, the 12 soldiers who'd died, their service records, their faces before Kabul had taken everything from them. Can you identify these individuals as the personnel who were killed in the building collapse? Nora looked at each face. Young men and women who'd signed up to serve their country and ended up dying because contractors valued profit over lives. She named each one from memory, their ranks, their roles in the unit, the injuries she'd been treating before everything went to hell. When she was done, several jury members were wiping their eyes. Torres thanked her and dismissed her from testimony. Cole went next, his statement matching hers in every detail that mattered, the argument, the radio call, the explosion that came from above instead of enemy positions. By noon, it was done. The grand jury had heard everything. Now they would deliberate and decide whether there was enough evidence to indict Richard Caldwell and Sentinel's strategic group for conspiracy, murder, and war crimes. Agent Webb found Nora in the witness waiting room. You did good in there. I just told them what happened. That's more than most people have the courage to do. He sat down beside her. The jury is deliberating now. Could take hours or days, but Torres thinks we have enough for indictments. What happens after that? We arrest Caldwell. We freeze Sentinel's assets. We start criminal trials that will probably take years to resolve. Webb paused. And you get to go back to your life, whatever that looks like now. Nora laughed without humor. I don't have a life. I have a job I'm suspended from and a history I spent 5 years trying to erase. Then maybe it's time to build something new. Before Nora could respond, Webb's phone rang. He answered, listened, and his expression went hard. When? How many? He stood up. Lock down the building. Nobody in or out. What's happening? Nora demanded. Diana Cross and 2 contractors just entered the courthouse through the parking garage. They got past security somehow. Fake credentials. Maybe inside help from someone we haven't identified yet. Webb was already moving, pulling his weapon. They're coming for you and Cole. Marshals are evacuating the grand jury. You need to get to the safe room. Where's Cole? Different floor. He's being moved now. Then I'm going with him. Like hell you are. The safe room is... Nora was already running. She hit the stairwell at full speed, her shoulders screaming in protest, adrenaline overriding every rational thought. 3 floors down. Find Cole. Get him somewhere actually safe, not just theoretically protected by people who kept underestimating Diana Cross. She found him on the 2nd floor, surrounded by marshals who were moving him toward an emergency exit. He saw her, and relief flashed across his face. Hayes? The window exploded, glass and gunfire. The marshals returned fire, but Cross's team had the advantage of surprise and position. 2 marshals went down in the first volley. The rest grabbed Cole, started dragging him toward cover. Nora didn't think. She grabbed a fallen marshal's weapon, trained it on the window where muzzle flash was still visible, and fired 3 controlled shots. The shooting from outside stopped. Move! She shouted. They got Cole into a stairwell, started descending. Behind them, footsteps, someone pursuing, fast and professional. Nora stayed at the rear, weapon raised, covering their retreat. They made it to the 1st floor before Cross appeared. She came around the corner, already firing, forcing everyone to dive for cover. Nora returned fire, driving Cross back. In the chaos, Cole's escorts got him through an emergency exit into the parking structure. Nora was alone with Cross in a courthouse hallway that smelled like gunpowder and fear. You should have taken my deal, Cross said, reloading smoothly. Now 12 more people are going to die because you couldn't let this go. Those 12 were already dead. You killed them 5 years ago. Nora kept her weapon trained on Cross's position. And today you're done killing. Cross laughed. You think the FBI can stop Sentinel? You think one testimony changes anything? Richard Caldwell has connections that go all the way to the Pentagon. Even if you indict him, he'll never see the inside of a cell. Maybe, but you will. Cross stepped into view, weapon raised. For one frozen moment, they faced each other. Combat medic turned nurse and special forces contractor turned assassin, both shaped by the same war, both carrying scars from Kabul. I almost killed you once, Cross said. In that building. I was the one who called in those coordinates. I watched it come down and thought you were finally gone. Then you should have checked the rubble closer. I won't make that mistake again. She fired. Nora was already moving, diving behind a support column as bullets chewed through drywall. She came up firing, forcing Cross to take cover. The hallway turned into a shooting gallery, both of them using courthouse architecture for protection, trading shots that echoed like thunder in the confined space. Then Nora's weapon clicked empty. Cross heard it, smiled, stepped out of cover with her gun raised. End of the line, Lieutenant. The shot came from behind Cross. Agent Webb, weapon drawn, standing at the far end of the hallway with federal backup streaming in behind him. Cross spun, tried to return fire, but there were too many of them. She went down under a tackle from 3 marshals, her weapon clattering across tile. Nora slumped against the wall, shaking, as FBI agents swarmed the hallway. Someone checked her for injuries. Someone else took the empty weapon from her hands. Webb appeared, looking furious and relieved in equal measure. I told you to get to the safe room. Cole needed backup more than I needed to hide. You could have been killed. But I wasn't. Nora looked past him to where marshals were restraining Cross, reading her rights in voices that were professionally calm despite the violence that had just unfolded. Is Cole safe? He's outside with a military escort. Vance showed up with half of Fort Huachuca when he heard about the breach. Webb helped her to her feet. It's over, Hayes. Cross is in custody. Her contractors are either dead or surrendering, and the grand jury just came back with indictments for Richard Caldwell and 7 Sentinel executives. Nora felt something break loose in her chest. Not relief, not yet, but the first crack in 5 years of carefully maintained numbness. What happens now? Now we process the biggest war crimes case the DoD has seen in 20 years. Now we make sure those 12 soldiers didn't die for nothing. Webb's expression softened slightly. And now you get to decide who you want to be when you're not running from the past. Outside the courthouse, Phoenix was drowning in camera crews and news vans. The story had broken during the grand jury testimony, leaked by someone, maybe deliberately, maybe not. Either way, the narrative was out there now. Decorated combat medic survives assassination attempts to expose corporate war crimes. 12 soldiers murdered to hide illegal weapons trafficking. Federal indictments for a private military corporation with Pentagon connections. It was everywhere. Every news channel, every website, every social media platform exploding with the kind of story that made people angry and sad and hungry for justice. Nora watched it unfold from a conference room in the courthouse, surrounded by prosecutors and agents who were already planning the criminal trials. Cole sat beside her, looking exhausted but alive. His wife and kids on video call crying and laughing and asking when he could come home. "How long until trial?" Nora asked Torres. "For Caldwell? Probably 18 months. These things move slowly when you're prosecuting someone with his resources and connections." Torres closed her laptop. "But the indictments are enough to freeze Sentinel's operations. Their government contracts are being suspended. Their assets are being audited. Even if Caldwell somehow walks, his company is finished." "And the 12 soldiers? Their families are being notified right now. They're being told the truth about what happened in Kabul, about how their loved ones died trying to stop a crime instead of falling in routine combat." Torres's voice was gentle. "It won't bring them back, but at least they'll know what they were fighting for." Nora nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. 3 days later, she stood in front of Mercy Ridge Medical Center for the first time since the fire. The hospital administrator, Patricia Keene, was waiting in her office with Dr. Brennan and a written apology for the administrative leave. "We made a mistake," Keene said simply. "We doubted you when we should have trusted you. We let protocol override judgment, and we're sorry." "Are you offering me my job back?" "I'm offering you a promotion. Director of Emergency Trauma Response. You'd oversee training for our entire ER staff, develop protocols for crisis situations, and serve as a consultant for complex trauma cases." Keene slid a folder across her desk. "Better pay, better hours, complete autonomy over how you structure the program." Nora looked at Brennan, who shrugged. "I recommended you for the position. After watching you work under pressure that would have broken most people, I figured you were qualified." "This is because of the publicity," Nora said. "Because the hospital wants to be associated with the hero nurse who exposed war crimes." "This is because you're the best trauma specialist I've ever seen," Brennan corrected. "And because this hospital would be lucky to have you in any capacity. The publicity is just a bonus." Nora opened the folder, scanned the offer. It was generous, more than generous. The kind of position people spent careers working toward. "I need time to think about it," she said. "Take all the time you need," Keene replied. Nora left the hospital and drove to a cemetery on the outskirts of Phoenix. She'd looked up the location online, a veterans' memorial garden where markers had been placed for soldiers whose bodies were never recovered. The 12 who died in Kabul were here, commemorated with bronze plaques set into a memorial wall. She found Captain David Morrison's plaque first, then the others. Young faces etched in metal, names she'd memorized, ranks and units and dates of death that were lies covering up the truth of how they'd actually been killed. Someone had left flowers. Fresh ones. Probably families who'd just learned what really happened. Nora stood there for a long time reading names, remembering faces. She'd carried these deaths with her for 5 years. Let them weigh her down. Let them define everything about who she'd become. But standing here now, she realized something. They didn't want her to carry them. They wanted her to honor them, to make sure their deaths meant something, to keep saving lives the way she hadn't been able to save theirs. And maybe that meant accepting the position at Mercy Ridge, using what she'd learned in war to train the next generation of trauma specialists, making sure fewer people died from preventable mistakes and arrogant assumptions. Her phone buzzed. A text from Cole. "Wife says thanks for saving my life." Again. "Kids want to meet the crazy nurse who fought off assassins. You free next week?" Nora smiled and typed back, "I'll check my schedule." Another text, this one from Martinez. "Heard you're some kind of hospital director now. Too good for the rest of us enlisted folk? Never. Coffee soon? You're buying. And one more, from Colonel Vance. The Army still wants you as a consultant, training position. Think about it. Nora pocketed her phone and looked back at the memorial wall. The sun was setting, turning everything golden and soft. Somewhere in downtown Phoenix, Richard Caldwell was being processed into federal custody. Somewhere in a maximum security facility, Diana Cross was awaiting trial for murder, attempted murder, and conspiracy to commit war crimes. And somewhere in Washington, D.C., Pentagon officials were scrambling to explain how a private military corporation had gotten away with killing American soldiers for profit. The truth was out. The invisible had been made visible, and the quiet nurse everyone had overlooked had become the center of a story that would probably be told for years. But that wasn't who Nora wanted to be. She didn't want to be famous, didn't want to be known as the hero who exposed Sentinel or the soldier who survived Kabul. She just wanted to be someone who saved lives and slept through the night without nightmares. She drove back to Mercy Ridge and walked into Patricia Keene's office without calling ahead. "I'll take the position," she said, "on one condition." "Name it." "No publicity, no interviews, no using my story to promote the hospital. I just want to do the work." Keene considered this. "The hospital board will push back. They want the PR value." "Then let them push. I'm not negotiating on this. Either I do the job quietly or I walk away and you find someone else." For 3 seconds, Keene didn't move. Then she extended her hand. "Deal. You start Monday." Nora shook it. 2 weeks later, she stood in front of a classroom full of nurses and residents, teaching them the trauma protocols she'd developed in combat zones. How to triage when resources were limited. How to stay calm when everything was chaos. How to make impossible decisions and live with the consequences. Dr. Brennan sat in the back row, taking notes like a student. After class, he caught up with her in the hallway. "You're a natural teacher," he said. "I'm just telling them what I learned the hard way. That's what teaching is." He paused. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you stayed. The hospital is better with you here. Even though I made you look like an idiot that first night, especially because of that. Someone needed to remind me that being chief of surgery doesn't mean being right about everything." Brennan smiled slightly. "Humility is good for the soul, even if it's painful for the ego." 3 months later, Nora sat in a federal courtroom watching Richard Caldwell's preliminary hearing. He looked smaller in person than he had in photos. An old man in an expensive suit, flanked by lawyers who probably cost more per hour than most people made in a month. He pled not guilty to all charges. The judge set trial for 18 months out. Cole was there, fully recovered now, sitting with his wife and daughters. Martinez was there, in dress uniform, representing every soldier who'd ever been betrayed by the people supposed to protect them. And behind them, families of the 12 soldiers who'd died in Kabul, finally knowing the truth, finally seeing justice begin to unfold. Caldwell's lawyers tried to get the case dismissed. The judge denied the motion. They tried to suppress Nora's testimony, denied again. They tried to paint her as unreliable, traumatized, motivated by revenge. The prosecutor, Torres, shut that down with medical records, service commendations, and testimony from dozens of soldiers Nora had saved during her tours. By the time Torres was done, Nora looked less like a questionable witness and more like a decorated war hero who'd risked everything to tell the truth. Caldwell's expression never changed, but his lawyers looked worried. Outside the courthouse, Nora avoided the cameras and found a quiet coffee shop 3 blocks away. She ordered black coffee and sat by the window, watching Phoenix go about its business. People living ordinary lives, unaware of the extraordinary things that happened in courtrooms and hospitals and war zones. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. "Hayes, Lieutenant Hayes, this is Captain Rachel Ortiz. We spoke briefly after you saved Staff Sergeant Cole." A pause. "I wanted to let you know that because of your testimony and the exposure of what happened in Kabul, the Army is completely overhauling combat medic training. We're implementing new protocols based on your field innovations. Your work is going to save thousands of lives." Nora felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "That's good to hear, Captain. It's more than good. It's transformational. And I wanted to make sure you knew that those 12 soldiers you couldn't save, their deaths are leading to changes that will protect countless others. That's not nothing, Lieutenant." "No," Nora said quietly. "It's not nothing." She ended the call and sat there for a long time, drinking coffee that had gone cold, watching the city move around her. 5 years ago, she'd been pulled from rubble and told she was dead. She'd accepted that death, embraced it, used it as permission to disappear into a life that was safe and small and invisible. But the truth was, she'd never been good at being invisible, even when she tried, even when she hid behind oversized scrubs and silence and carefully maintained anonymity. She'd still been the person who saw things others missed and saved lives others would have lost. That person couldn't be invisible, didn't want to be. And maybe that was okay. 6 months after the courthouse shooting, Nora stood in the Mercy Ridge Trauma Bay training a new group of residents on emergency thoracotomy procedures. She demonstrated on a practice dummy, her hands moving with the same practice precision that had saved Cole, that had saved dozens of soldiers in Kabul, that came from years of making life and death decisions in impossible conditions. The residents watched with something approaching awe. After the demonstration, one of them, a young woman named Dr. Sarah Kim, approached nervously. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "How do you stay calm? When everything is chaos and people are dying and you have to make decisions with incomplete information." Nora thought about it. "You don't stay calm. You just learn to work through the fear instead of being paralyzed by it. You remember that doing something imperfect is better than doing nothing perfect. And you accept that sometimes you'll make the wrong call, but that doesn't mean you stop making calls." Kim nodded slowly. "Is that what you learned in Afghanistan?" "That's what I learned from failing. Afghanistan just gave me a lot of opportunities to practice." The residents laughed, tension breaking. Nora dismissed them and found Dr. Brennan waiting in the hallway. "You're good at this," he said. "You've mentioned that before." "I'm mentioning it again because I mean it." He held out a folder. "Hospital Board wants to expand your program. Train not just our staff, but regional hospitals across Arizona. Create a network of trauma specialists using your protocols." Nora took the folder. "That's ambitious. That's necessary. What you know shouldn't be limited to one hospital." Brennan paused. "Also, there's a writer from a medical journal who wants to interview you about battlefield medicine innovations. I told them I'd ask." "Tell them no." "You sure? It would be good publicity for—" "I don't want publicity, Marcus. I just want to do the work." He studied her face. "You know, most people in your position would leverage this into book deals and speaking tours and cable news appearances. You could make a fortune selling your story." "My story isn't for sale." Nora handed back the folder. "But I'll consider the regional training program. Send me the details." That night, she sat in her apartment, a real apartment now, not a temporary rental she could abandon at a moment's notice, and opened her laptop. The trial coverage was everywhere. Richard Caldwell's legal team was already making noise about appeals and procedural errors and constitutional violations. But the damage was done. Sentinel Strategic Group had lost every government contract. Half their executives had resigned. The company was hemorrhaging money and reputation and any chance of surviving the scandal. And tomorrow, the trial would continue. More testimony, more evidence, more exposure of what had really happened in Kabul. Nora closed the laptop and looked around her apartment. It was small, sparsely furnished, but it was hers. Not a hiding place, not a temporary stop, just a home. On the wall, she'd hung a photo Martinez had sent her, the 14 soldiers who'd been in that convoy before Kabul. Young faces, confident smiles, people who'd believed they were serving something bigger than themselves. 12 of them were gone now. But their deaths had exposed a crime that reached into the highest levels of military contracting, had led to reforms that would protect future soldiers, had proven that even when powerful people tried to bury the truth, sometimes one stubborn combat medic was enough to dig it back up. Her phone buzzed. A text from Cole. Verdict came in on Diana Cross. Life without parole, justice. Nora smiled and typed back, "Not justice, just accountability." But it's a start. Because that was the truth she'd learned over the past 6 months. Justice was complicated. Justice was imperfect. Justice didn't bring back the dead or erase the trauma or make everything magically okay. But accountability mattered. Truth mattered. Making sure the people responsible actually faced consequences. That mattered. And if 12 soldiers had died to expose a crime, the least she could do was make sure their deaths counted for something. A year after the courthouse shooting, Nora stood in front of a different memorial. This one was at Fort Huachuca, dedicated specifically to the 12 soldiers killed in Kabul. Their families had pushed for it, worked with the army to create something permanent, something that told the truth about how they'd died. The ceremony was small. Families, a few army officials, Colonel Vance giving a speech about sacrifice and truth, and the courage it took to stand up against corruption. Cole was there with his wife and daughters. Martinez was there in dress uniform. Even Dr. Brennan had made the drive from Phoenix, standing quietly at the back. When it was Nora's turn to speak, she walked to the podium and looked out at the faces watching her. People who'd lost sons and daughters, husbands and wives, friends and colleagues. People who'd lived with lies for 6 years and were now trying to rebuild their understanding of what had happened. "I wish I could tell you I saved them," she said quietly. "I wish I could stand here and say I did everything right, and they died anyway. But that's not what happened. I made mistakes. I prioritized the wrong injuries. I wasted time on procedures that didn't matter while missing things that did. And when that building came down, I couldn't get to all of them fast enough." The audience was silent. I've spent 6 years running from that failure, hiding from it, pretending I could outrun the weight of knowing I wasn't good enough when it mattered most. Nora's voice caught, but she pushed through. "But standing here now, I realize something. They didn't die because I failed. They died because someone called in an airstrike on their position to hide a crime. They died because contractors valued profit over human life. They died because the system that was supposed to protect them betrayed them instead." She looked at the memorial, bronze plaques with names and faces and dates. "So I'm done running, I'm done hiding, and I'm going to spend the rest of my career making sure that what I learned from failing them gets used to save others. That's not redemption, that's not enough. But it's what I can do. And maybe that matters." She stepped down from the podium to absolute silence. Then someone started clapping. Cole, then Martinez, then others, until the sound filled the memorial garden. But Nora barely heard it. She was looking at the names on the bronze, memorizing them one more time, making a promise she intended to keep. 2 years after testifying before the grand jury, Nora received word that Richard Caldwell had been found guilty on 17 counts, including conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. He was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Sentinel Strategic Group filed for bankruptcy 3 months later. Nora was in the middle of teaching a trauma response course when she got the news. She finished the class, dismissed the students, and sat alone in the empty training room feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Not happiness, exactly. Not satisfaction. Just the quiet knowledge that she'd done what she set out to do. She'd told the truth. She'd faced down assassins and lawyers and powerful people who wanted her silent, and she'd won. Not because she was special, not because she was a hero, but because she was stubborn enough to keep standing up every time someone tried to knock her down. Dr. Brennan found her there an hour later. "You heard?" he asked. "Yeah." "How do you feel?" "Tired." She looked at him. "Is that wrong? Shouldn't I feel triumphant or vindicated or something?" "You feel however you feel. There's no right answer." Brennan sat down beside her. "For what it's worth, I think you're allowed to be tired. You've been fighting for 2 years. Now it's done. Your body is probably just catching up with that reality." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Nora said finally. "That first night. When Cole came into the trauma bay and you dismissed him as delirious. When I was just the invisible nurse nobody noticed. I remember. If I'd stayed invisible, if I just let you move him to surgery like you wanted, he would have died. And none of this," she gestured vaguely at everything, "would have happened. Cross would still be killing witnesses. Sentinel would still be running illegal operations. Those 12 soldiers would still be a classified footnote that nobody questioned. So you're saying I should thank you for disobeying me?" "I'm saying sometimes the people everyone overlooks are the ones who see things nobody else does. And maybe that's worth paying attention to." Brennan smiled. "Noted, though for the record, nobody overlooks you anymore." That was true. In the 2 years since Kabul had been exposed, Nora had become something of a legend in emergency medicine circles. The combat medic who'd taken on corporate assassins and won. The nurse who'd revolutionized trauma training. The invisible woman who'd become impossible to ignore. She turned down 63 interview requests, declined 4 book deals, refused 7 speaking engagements at medical conferences. She just wanted to do the work. 3 years after that first night in the trauma bay, Nora stood in the same bay training a new resident on damage control resuscitation. The kid was nervous, fumbling with the IV line, apologizing every time he made a mistake. "Stop apologizing," Nora said gently. "Mistakes are how you learn. Just fix it and move on." "But if I'd done this wrong with a real patient, then you would have caught it, corrected it, and they would have survived. That's the job. Not being perfect, just being good enough to keep people breathing until perfect becomes possible." The resident relaxed slightly. "Is that what you did in Afghanistan?" "Every single day." Nora adjusted the IV line, showed him the correct technique. "Being a combat medic means accepting that you'll never have enough supplies or enough time or enough hands to do everything perfectly. So you prioritize. You improvise. You make the best decisions you can with incomplete information, and you live with the consequences." "How do you live with the consequences?" Nora thought about 12 bronze plaques in a memorial garden, about 5 years spent running, about the moment she'd finally stopped hiding and started fighting back. "You remember that every life you save matters more than every life you lose, and you keep showing up anyway." The resident nodded, something shifting in his expression. Understanding, maybe, or just the beginning of it. That night, Nora drove out to the memorial garden one last time. It had been months since she'd visited. She'd stopped needing to come here every week, stopped using it as a place to process guilt and grief and all the weight she'd been carrying. But tonight felt like a good night to say goodbye. She stood in front of the 12 plaques as the sun set over Fort Huachuca, turning the desert bronze and gold. She read each name one last time, remembered each face, made a final accounting of the debt she'd been trying to repay. "I did what I said I would," she told them quietly. "I made sure your deaths meant something. I made sure the people responsible faced consequences, and I'm using what I learned from losing you to save others. That's all I can do. I hope it's enough." The plaques, of course, didn't answer, but standing there in the fading light, Nora felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness. She'd never forgive herself for the ones she couldn't save, but acceptance. The understanding that she'd carried them as far as she could, and now it was time to put them down and keep walking. She drove back to Phoenix as the stars came out. Her phone rang. Dr. Kim, the resident she'd been training, calling with a question about a case. Nora talked her through it, heard the relief in Kim's voice when she figured out the answer herself. "Thanks, Dr. Hayes. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'd figure it out. You're smarter than you think. That's what you always say, because it's always true." She ended the call and smiled. This was the work now. Not saving soldiers under fire, not exposing war crimes, just teaching the next generation to be better than she'd been, to see things she'd missed, to save lives she couldn't reach. It wasn't glory. It wasn't dramatic. But it mattered. And maybe that was enough. 5 years after the night she'd stopped being invisible, Nora sat in her office at Mercy Ridge Medical Center reviewing applications for the new trauma fellowship program she'd created. 50 applicants for 5 positions, all of them brilliant, all of them hungry to learn. She'd picked the ones who reminded her of herself, the ones everyone overlooked, the ones who saw things others missed, the ones who were stubborn enough to keep fighting when everyone else wanted to give up. Because those were the people who changed things, not the ones who were loudest or most confident, not the ones with the best credentials or most impressive resumes, the quiet ones, the invisible ones, the ones who showed up and did the work without needing credit or recognition or glory. Those were the ones who saved lives. Dr. Brennan knocked on her office door. "Got a minute?" "Always." He sat down, looking pleased with himself. "I just got off the phone with the American College of Emergency Physicians. They want to give you their Distinguished Service Award. It's a big deal. Black tie ceremony, speech in front of 1,000 emergency medicine specialists, recognition from—" "No. You didn't let me finish." "Don't need to. The answer is no." Brennan sighed. "You know, most people would be honored." "I'm sure they would. But I'm not most people." Nora set down the applications. "I don't need awards, Marcus. I don't need recognition. I just need to keep doing the work." "The work you're doing is worth recognizing. Then recognize it by sending me better residents, by funding my training programs, by making sure the things I'm teaching actually get used." She met his eyes. "That matters more than a trophy and a fancy dinner." He studied her for a moment. "You really mean that?" Every word. You're a strange woman, Nora Hayes. I've been called worse. That night, Nora stood on her apartment balcony watching Phoenix spread out below her in a grid of lights and shadows. Somewhere in that city, people were living and dying and fighting and healing. Somewhere, residents she'd trained were saving lives using protocols she'd developed. Somewhere, families of 12 soldiers were sleeping easier, knowing the truth had finally come out. And somewhere, a woman who'd spent 5 years being invisible was finally learning to be seen. Not as a hero, not as a victim, not as anything except a person who'd survived terrible things and decided to use that survival to help others. That was enough. That had always been enough. Nora's phone buzzed. A text from Cole. Kid wants to be a combat medic when she grows up. Says you're her hero. Thought you should know. Nora smiled and typed back. Tell her heroes are overrated, but trauma nurses are always hiring. She set down her phone and looked out at the city one more time. 5 years ago, she'd been a ghost. A dead woman walking through a life that wasn't really hers, hiding from a past she couldn't escape. Now she was just Nora Hayes. Trauma nurse. Teacher. Survivor. Witness. Woman who'd been overlooked and underestimated and dismissed as invisible until the moment she'd proven that quiet strength could topple empires. And that was exactly who she wanted to be. Not invisible, not famous, just present, just real, just doing the work that mattered and trusting that would be enough. In a hospital across Phoenix, Dr. Kim was saving a patient using techniques Nora had taught her. In a federal prison, Richard Caldwell was beginning year 3 of a 45-year sentence. In a memorial garden at Fort Huachuca, 12 names were carved in bronze, telling a truth that had taken 6 years to surface. And in an apartment in Phoenix, a woman who'd been told she was dead stood on a balcony and breathed the desert air and finally knew, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The invisible had been made visible. The overlooked had been vindicated. And the quiet nurse nobody remembered was teaching the world that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to stay silent when everyone expects you to disappear. That was her legacy. Not glory, not fame. Just the steady, stubborn insistence that truth matters and lives matter, and the people everyone dismisses might just be the ones who change everything. And in the end, that was more than enough. It was everything.